Count on me. You're gonna have good old Rob to talk you through all this. 2. Hello. What's up? Hello, folks. How's it going? Oh, look, we got a gifted sub from Paratus 8 minutes ago. I missed that. Thank you, Paratus, for the gifted sub. I was just sitting outside on the balcony. Normally, I was a little hungry. I had just made a sandwich when I started the stream, and I didn't want to wait the 8 minutes or whatever it is, 8-10 minutes before I ate it live on camera. So I had a nice little sit, a nice little balcony sit. A nice little balcony sit before the stream started. I had my sandwich. I had most of my beverage already. It was nice. It's a really nice balcony to sit on. I really enjoy sitting out on that balcony. A couple times this summer when I was feeling really crazy. I put on my little shorts. You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I am going to be so annoying next month.
Marina, thank you so much for the... We're just keep trading back the same $5. But I love it. Thank you, Marina, for the 23 months tier 1. Oh boy. Oh boy, so close to a very, very important milestone. Thank you again, Marina. I really appreciate it. I'm glad you're part of the community. Yeah, a couple times this summer though, I went out with my little shorts and no shirt on when it was really hot in the summer. In my tiny little green shorts, and I went and sat out there when I was feeling very brave. It was kind of nice. It's a very nice balcony to sit on. Caused quite a stir in the neighborhood. I don't think anyone noticed. So Jay, I saw that the WWE is starting to release people. I saw the Mustafa Ali and Emma was released as well, which is, it seems cruel to Emma. After all this time, you bring Emma back and then just release her again after not doing anything like 6 months later. Emma was like a centerpiece of like the resurgence of the women's division in WWE and totally doesn't get credit for that. Never really amounted to anything on the main roster. Kind of took away everything that made her kind of fun and different originally. Then just released her. She's in the Impact for a while, was kind of floating around. She comes back to WWE. They finally gets a chance to come back. And then they just don't do anything with her and release her like 6 months later. But I didn't realize Dolph Ziggler was released. That's crazy. Riddick Moss didn't amount to much either. Dolph Ziggler is crazy. I mean, when I came back to being a wrestling fan in like 2012 or so, Dolph Ziggler was my guy. Like, I loved Punk and Daniel Bryan and those guys, but like, I loved Dolph Ziggler. In fact, I still have a Dolph Ziggler shirt. I have the "It's Not Showing Off If You Back It Up" Dolph Ziggler shirt. Hot pink. I bought so many pay-per-views in that year that he had the Money in the Bank briefcase. He had it for like 8 months, and it was so agonizing. Every single time I thought he was going to cash it in, it wouldn't happen. I had almost given up on it happening, and then he finally cashed it in on the Raw after WrestleMania 29, I think. And it was like the best Money in the Bank cash in, and the crowd absolutely went bananas over it. And then they never did anything. It was amazing. I was like, fine, Dolph's a main eventer, finally. He's the world champion. Like really memorable, iconic cash in. He had that fun faction with AJ and Big E. I was like, man, I hope this sticks around for like so long. And then it was like they just gave up after he got a concussion like almost immediately. He had an amazing match with Alberto Del Rio, which kind of really turned him face. And it's like, oh, now he can really ascend. Now he's like a babyface. He's got the crowd behind him. And then just did nothing with it. And he never got back to that level again. It's crazy that they would release him. He's been such a workhorse for them for like 15 years now or longer. Like, it's hard to believe. When he won when he did that Money in the Bank cash in and won the title, I was honestly like, I was so happy. That was probably like the most emotional reaction I've ever had to watching wrestling. I was just thrilled. I'm very surprised that they would release it. I mean, he just seems like a good guy to... Although I haven't really been a fan for the last couple of years. I still enjoy his wrestling and everything, but he changed his look. He kind of grew the long hair out. He started to wear different tights, and then it never worked for me. I liked when he had the stringy bleached hair, the trunks. It was a good look. I'm challenging Rob for the Cutie in the Tub belt. No one will ever take that title from me. Never. Let's just, for old time's sake. For old time's sake, I think we should watch this. It's really an amazing match for just being like 5 minutes long. This is still the most, to me, it's the most iconic Money in the Bank cash in.
Courageous effort by Del Rio, but
look at the pop. Listen to the pop. This is such a cool faction.
He's waited his time. He's cherry-picked this moment. This is it.
He had that briefcase for like so long, for like 9 months. He was cashing in the Money in the Bank briefcase, Dakadoon. So when you have the Money in the Bank briefcase, you're allowed to have a title shot at any time, at a time of your choosing. So it's become a thing. Like if you have an opportunist there that has the briefcase, you pick your spot. This is after Del Rio had a match. His leg was all fucked up, so Ziggler came out with the briefcase to have a match when he's already injured, basically. Many times, Coherent Screams, I talk about it a lot, but understanding the world of pro wrestling helps you understand the world of politics a lot more. Like certain concepts about wrestling make it very easy to, or it translates very easily to the political world, especially the idea of like kayfabe, you know? But yeah, I agree. Or like Donald Trump, big heel, a great heel, one of the best heels to ever do it. Every Raw, every pay-per-view for like 9 months waiting for this Money in the Bank cash in, and I never thought it was going to happen. And finally, when I had given up hope, is when it finally happened. And I was so hyped. Big E is a big beefy boy. I was looking to soaps for guys. Yeah, it's a soap opera. It's like an exhibition. Like it's really incredible athletic feats and big stunts that are happening like live in front of an audience with no second takes and no crash pads and no wires. Like it's really an amazing thing. It's really an incredible art form. Yeah, and when you get into it, when you develop like an emotional connection with somebody, and it doesn't matter whether it's scripted. Like it's similarly to a movie, when you suspend your disbelief, if you get into it, then you can have emotional catharsis from it. Just like if you watch a real sport or like when you watch anything. And I remember this just like any other big sporting event that I ever watched. Like I was so happy. I had invested so much time into watching this Money in the Bank run from Ziggler. And when it finally paid off like this, I was so happy. Yes, the wrestlers do know it's scripted. Yeah, they do. Man, so I feel bad for Dolph. I don't know. It's like this is like the pinnacle of his career. This is now 10 years ago, which is hard to believe. There are crash pads, but they're shitty foam bricks poorly hidden under a cloth. Not even like the rim. The mat is pretty hard. It's pretty firm, but it's on a big spring. So it's like think about jumping on a trampoline, but instead of it stretchy, it's like you're jumping on a big mat that's just going up and down on a spring. So there's a little give to it, but it's still pretty like physically hard to fall on. But it's going up and down, bouncing up and down a little bit. And yeah, that's it. This was 10 years ago. This is the pinnacle of his career, and they just never did anything with this. Like, this was such a cool moment. The crowd was so into it. Like, people were really ready for like an extended run of Dolph in the main event, and it just never happened. It just never materialized, which is sad, you know. And then now he's released today. It's genuinely surprising because he seemed like just a good guy to have around. Not the ring. I mean, the stuff they land on for outside spots. Oh yeah, that's just like a crash, like a gym mat. It's one of my big regrets because, like, as you know, like when I was getting started doing freelance writing and stuff, I was like a wrestling journalist. I wrote about wrestling in Vice Sports and Paste magazine and a few other places. And I did this whole feature on the Torture Chamber Pro Wrestling Dojo in Montreal. I hung out at the dojo for like a week or two, hanging out with all the students that were there, learning how to wrestle and watching how it works. It was really cool. And one of my big regrets, though, is I really wanted it was with this guy Drew Onyx, who's a Montreal guy. He's a wrestler. He's a rapper. He's a really nice guy, and he runs this wrestling school, the pro wrestling Torture Chamber Pro Wrestling Dojo. And one of my big regrets that I wanted him to ask me to body slam me on the mat so I could get the feeling of like taking an actual bump in the ring, but I kind of chickened out. And I didn't ask him. I kind of wish that I did. I've taken a suplex or a scoop slam or something. Just so I could know. Just so I could know what it's like. Anyway, shout out to Dolph. Shout out to Dolph. I guess he hadn't done much in a couple years. Although they did give him a weird NXT championship run a couple months ago as well, I remember. But it's it's sad. It's sad that he's released and that they never did anything with this. This was like a really cool moment. Next time in Montreal, I can put you in the sharpshooter. I don't think so. I think that's all right. Mustafa Ali, I saw, got released as well. And he's a big talent as well. Super talented guy. I'm sure he's going to end up going somewhere and doing something interesting. I wonder if this apple's going to be mealy. That's better. That's better. It's not so soft. Wonder if I have last season apples? I don't know. I think I just grabbed a bad one. Rob ASMR when? We often do it. You get ASMR like every day on here. What do you think of that? I got an album on constant rotation right now. I've always been a big like Fleetwood Mac fan. Obviously, Rumors is one of the best albums ever. One of the biggest selling albums ever. I've always really loved Fleetwood Mac. I like Tango in the Night as well. It's a very good album. But I had never really listened to. I'd listened to a bit of Stevie Nicks solo stuff because she was a big solo artist as well. But I had never really gotten into Lindsey Buckingham's solo work. Lindsey Buckingham, one of the main songwriters from Fleetwood Mac, obviously. And what got me into this? So on The Bear, this season of The Bear, they used Holiday Road in one episode when the pastry chef guy goes to visit Copenhagen or whatever it is. And they play Holiday Road by Lindsey Buckingham, which is the theme that he wrote for National Lampoon's Vacation, which I hadn't heard in a long time, but it's a banger song. It's an absolutely amazing song. So I was listening to that, and then I have started getting into Lindsey Buckingham's first solo album, Law and Order, from I think 81 or 82. After I was listening to Holiday Road, and it is so good. Particularly the song Trouble, which was the big single from that. Trouble by Lindsey Buckingham. It's on. I just keep listening to it over and over. Like I open my eyes in the morning and it just starts playing in my head like again. It's really, really good. I just can't stop listening to this album. I really do love the genre of like 70s artists going into the 80s and exploring the different sort of new recording techniques and instruments and things that were available to them. I think that's always a really fascinating genre. And this is an album that I would classify in that genre that I've never really got a chance to listen to as much. And it's really, really good. Tango in the Night is an example of that. Like we have Fleetwood Mac that is this big 70s band playing songs like Everywhere and stuff that had some synth in it and some different kind of stuff going on. Now I love that genre. But you got to listen to this album, Lindsey Buckingham, Law and Order. It's just fantastic. And the song Trouble is so good. I've been considering doing a cover of it. I've seen more Fleetwood Mac cover bands than I've seen concerts that are not Fleetwood Mac cover bands. Wow. You see a lot of Fleetwood Mac cover bands, I guess? Is that really that common? I'm just going to eat my apple. Just eating my apple. Enjoying my apple. I don't know why. I think I had lots of friends in Fleetwood Mac cover bands around Charlottesville, Virginia. Well, that's cool. They got a lot of good songs to choose from, big catalog to choose from. But I do think I'm going to do my own cover of this song, Trouble by Lindsey Buckingham. I've been trying to find like songs to cover that are like 80s songs that haven't been overplayed. That's why I did that cover of the Robin Gibb song. And I think Trouble by Lindsey Buckingham might be the next on the docket. Chat seems very slow today. Is everything okay, chat? Is everything alright? Are you doing okay? Maybe I've got to put on some kind of video content. Maybe just firing off with the stream with Dolph Ziggler's Money in the Bank cash in. Maybe that was the wrong move. Well, I wanted to talk about Ukraine and Zelensky stuff, so maybe I can just jump right into doing this Walking Out This breakthrough news video about this. We'll give chat a bit more time to wake up here. Why am I the only one with energy here, chat? I need you to carry me, not the other way around. I need you to carry my sorry ass. I'm counting on you. I'm relying on you. I'm sorry, Rob. I just got bummed that I won't be able to put you in the sharpshooter. Only if I can put you in a Texas cloverleaf. That's my preferred submission hold. It's my preferred submission maneuver. used by the great Dean Malenko. Do you have any favorite shapes? I mean, I'm fond of the triangle, as you know. I'm fond of the triangle. Nature's most powerful shape. You know, nothing nefarious about it. It's opening, it's inviting, it's welcoming. It's strong. It holds up bridges and buildings. Brings people together. It's too strong now. Oh my. I thought the oval was more powerful. It's just big oval that wants you to that tells you that. Big Egg has been spreading their lies. Trying to tear people apart. This is an alert from Big Sphere. Cease and desist all oval-related activities. Basically, Superman after a few raw egg licks. See, people are still talking about the egg licking all these months later. I was totally fine. It was totally fine to do that. That's right, Brian. Yeah, I can't look at that Rhea Ripley clip on here. I'm gonna violate terms of service. Anyway, what else is going on? Wrestling journalist perspective. We had a great episode of The Insurgents last night. Should probably promote that. On The Insurgents, we talked to Dan Boguslaw of The Intercept, who's been covering the auto workers strikes. And we had a really good conversation about that. I would definitely recommend you give that a listen. It's a free episode. Just click the link below to check that out. Listen to our interview with Dan Boguslaw. I'll actually put the link right here as well.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I listened to the Juniper one on the train. Oh, good. That was a good one, too. There's the episode. Please give that a listen. We're going to cover more on this show as well about the UAW strike, but we had a really good conversation about that. I mean, listen, everything can be so depressing whenever we talk about what's going on politically in America or Canada or geopolitically. It's depressing. But seeing the kind of language that is coming out of like UAW leadership, Sean Fain, it's like it really does make you think that like we might actually be able to come together here and maybe actually change society at some point. You see Trump handing out free pizza. I didn't see that. I saw the clip going around, but I didn't watch it. You don't really see Biden doing this. I would like to see Brandon go into the middle of a busy restaurant and pass out food items. Did he actually pay for that pizza? He probably put it on a credit card that he's not going to pay. I can't hear the song. Listen to this again. Oh, it's that. Man, that song sucks. That song sucks so bad. I miss Trump doing his little dance to the village people. Well, at least I know I'm free. The longboarding on the TV. There's a lot to like about this clip, honestly. He's also going around the state saying abortion bans are bad. That's interesting too. He's also reaching. I didn't hear that. I mean, it makes sense that he would do that, considering how unpopular in most of the country these bans actually are, except with an extreme minority of like fucking psychos. You know, and that's what a populist is. You know, you change your beliefs depending on what the polls say and what's going to make people happy. He's also planning on talking to these UAW workers. We got in a little bit into this in the podcast last night as well. The UAW leadership is kind of trying to distance themselves from Trump, which makes sense as well. They're saying like there's not going to be billionaires that are going to come to our rescue here, and talks about the ways that like Trump and other conservatives and Republicans have like increased inequality and, you know, led to working communities like going through a lot of real hardship. But just the fact that he is reaching out and like wanting to do that, I think is like pretty interesting. We talked about this yesterday as well. It's just like, it's insane that like you look at the polling numbers on this UAW strike, and America overwhelmingly supports these auto workers. Overwhelmingly, like not even close. You'd think Biden could throw on it. He's the most pro-union president in American history. Could go throw on a union jacket and walk in the picket line, and easy, nice photo op. Even from like a cynical political consultant perspective, right? It's just a no-brainer. It's super popular. People will like it. You're showing that you stand with, if you claim to stand with unions and claim to stand with working people, then go fucking do it. You're the most pro-union president ever, Jack, but if you are, you should be going on to the picket line with these workers. It's easy dub. Exactly. But he's to his core against, yeah, and it's also his advisors. He's surrounded with these neoliberal advisors that don't support the union movement in the first place, but then want to think about the optics of that and who is it going to be offended by it and who's it going to alienate. It's going to alienate the bosses and the donor class, and they don't do it. But it was amazing how easy that would be for Biden to do that, and would be able to have like be part of something that is super overwhelmingly popular. and actually following through on the things that you're saying about being pro-union. Instead, what did Biden say? It's like auto workers deserve a raise or something, but didn't explicitly say I stand fully with these workers whether if they go on strike. I think their demands should be met. It was very like, I'm the most pro-union ever, and auto workers deserve a raise, but didn't really mention anything about the strike, and certainly didn't say like they should be getting their demands met. By the way, Brian, thank you for did I say thank you for the gifted sub? I don't believe I did. Thank you, Brian. 7 minutes ago for the gifted sub. I appreciate it. I was too fired up by talking about Lindsey Buckingham. I wonder how much potential money is offered up to his campaign by auto manufacturers. Yeah, well, I mean, like him and Obama are always talking about how they saved the auto industry during the recession, but it's like the fact that they had to step in to save that industry led to a lot of the conditions that have been made it really difficult for auto workers. That this whole strike is over. This whole 2-tiered payment system came into effect around that time. That saved the ownership class of these companies, and I guess in theory that protected some jobs of auto workers, which is not nothing. But in the same way that rescuing the banks was about rescuing the banks, not homeowners, rescuing the auto industry was about rescuing the ownership class and the shareholders, and workers were the ones that had to sacrifice in that. Yeah, should have nationalized them. Or at least one. It's pathetic, the neoliberal aversion to nationalizing any resources or nationalizing any industries. It's so pathetic that we don't even hear anything about this in Canada or America. Like we're talking about with the grocery prices, the grocery wars. No, even in our most left-wing social democratic party, whatever, you never even hear one thing about it. We hear maybe they can pay more taxes, maybe they can do this, maybe they can do that, but the idea of just nationalizing this industry is just not discussed. In the same way that building public housing is not discussed, or in the same way of nationalizing the auto industry is not discussed. All we can do is give tax incentives to banks, to real estate developers, to the auto industry to build factories there. That's all we can do. Biden was able to squash the railroad strike and still kept support from his base, so probably doesn't feel need to do too much. I mean, it's shocking that he doesn't feel the need to do too much, considering like Trump's been indicted like 12 fucking times, and I think right now is either tied with Biden in the polls or leading. Like the idea that they're not and what are they doing? What's their economic message when this is going on? Like they're tied with a guy who's been arrested like 18 fucking times, and what's their economic message? Everything is great. Everything is great. So stop complaining. Why are you complaining? We fixed everything. Everything is good. Stop it. Shh. Shh. That's their economic message. That's really going to go over well, I think, in the election. Definitely. It's wild to me that the Bush admin put in price controls so businesses couldn't gouge people after Katrina, but the Biden Trudeau admins can't do that now for groceries. I didn't even know that Bush did that. When we think about Bush and Katrina, all we think about is the complete disaster that was. Yeah, it's really stupid, and I don't know, passing up what could be just an easy win standing with striking auto workers, and instead opting to just like lecture everyone about how great the economy is doing, while Donald Trump is like beating them or tied with them in the polls despite being like indicted so many times. Yeah, it was the bare minimum. Yeah, Krugman's out there. That's what's going to help Biden. Some elite coastal liberal lecturing people in the New York Times about how great he's doing. Sure, that's going to really turn the tables on Trump, on the orange man. Surely that's going to convince everybody that like is having a harder time making ends meet, harder time paying rent, working for five shitty gig economy tech companies. Paul Krugman's coming to the rescue in the New York Times to lecture everyone about how wonderful the economy is. No, price controls aren't even in the toolbox. Like we talked about Nixon. Nixon did price controls. Like we were saying before, it's like no matter what you think of Nixon, he was a horrendous person on many levels, and a war criminal as well. But probably the most left-wing president that there's been in decades. Like to the left, Nixon is to the left of both Clinton and Obama. That's the state of American politics. Like that's what the neoliberal era has done to shift everything so far to the right. Like even the stuff that Biden has passed, the whole infrastructure bill and like some of the meager things that he's done, that would be like, that's like a Republican agenda from 20 years ago. Like now it's being celebrated as like this big liberal victory, but it's really just like a Republican agenda from decades ago. And meanwhile, he's continued all the same foreign policy things or made things worse, either in Ukraine, Iran, you know. And they're supposed to celebrate that. They celebrate that like it's this big, like he's the new FDR. It's this big, huge liberal victory. Who reads the New York Times? It seems like just a certain group of people read the New York Times. Half of them write in the paper themselves. And half of them are just like journalists and consultants, and they just sit around and like jerk each other off all day, reading the New York Times opinion pieces and talking about how great it is. Obama famously was obsessed with like appeasing these people, the New York Times opinion people, like David Brooks. Obama, that's the brilliant liberal fucking leader, progressive leader, was obsessed with what David Brooks thought about him. Trying to appeal to these people, which is who have a constituency of nobody. No one cares what they have to say. Has zero connection to what anyone is actually experiencing in America or the world. But I'm so upset about David Brooks. I really want David Brooks to like me, and I'm going to keep trying to govern like Reagan. And hopefully David Brooks will say nice things about me. That's what he sounded like. David Brooks got community noted. Yeah, I saw the weird, like, this cost $75 for like a burger and fries and a little shitty salad and some kind of like Long Island iced tea beverage. What did the community notes say? Did it price check the meal? And here's a question about that David Brooks thing. $60 in drink. Imagine being you become president of the United States at a time when the economy is crashing. All these banks have just like completely imploded on themselves. The auto industry is failing. It's 8 years of Bush and the Iraq War. People are tired of it. And you campaign on hope and change. And there's actually an opportunity. You have not only the political ability to do it with this overwhelming majority of seats in both the Senate and the House. You have a huge mandate from millions of people that want you to go in and like actually change things and do something different. And you get in there and it's just like, how do I appeal to David Brooks? And that's what the strategy is. If this was the West Wing, what would we do? And that's what they did with that moment in American history. It's just so sad. I know, it's like, I just think it's Obama really is, for me, probably the most radicalizing political figure of my life, because that's when it really clicked about what's behind the ideology, you know? And what the grift is. I was like, oh, okay, I think I get it now. I think I get it. This is not the way. And then keeping up this, like, not only, you know, failing to meet that moment in terms of economic policy, but then like continuing this incredibly violent and brutal and grotesque and blood-drenched foreign policy with the drone warfare and warrantless assassinations and spying and overthrowing Libya. Like, Jesus Christ, what a radicalizing moment that is. So you're all trying to appeal to David Brooks. You take with all that political capital, all that skill. I mean, because he was a skilled person, right? Obviously, brilliant person, really once in a generation orator. All that skill, all an ability, the huge like actual massive majorities that they had to work with, and a huge mandate from people to really go in and change stuff. I'd be like, this is the guy I need to appeal to. David Brooks. Like the whole comp thing that happened at the beginning of Obama's presidency should have like indicated exactly how it was going to go, right? The cops arrest this black college professor going into his own home, causing a big outcry, outrage. Of course, obviously, Obama says the cops acted stupidly, which is just an objectively true thing to say. And then, of course, because these right-wing victimization freaks and like this whole right-wing propaganda apparatus goes, and they clutched their pearls after 8 years of George Bush. They clutched their pearls because Obama said the cops acted stupidly. And then that's a moment for Obama where he could have gone in one direction and he chose to go another direction. That's a moment where Obama could have said, go fuck yourself. Yeah, they acted stupidly. Stop pretending to be upset about they arrested a man going into his own home. What do you want me to say about it? Instead of just saying that, he said, I'm so sorry. And just like this pathetic triangulation, trying to appeal to everyone, trying to like shut down these totally bad faith right-wing media outrage cycles, which were never going to be related to anything he was actually doing, you know? Trying to appeal to these people, trying to appeal to David Brooks. I wonder what David Brooks wrote about the cop thing. I'm sure he wrote a long missive, a hand-wringing missive about Obama's language. So instead of just being like, fuck you, the cops acted stupidly, they have the beer summit. We're going to bring everyone to have a beer at the White House. Just pathetic. It's a pathetic person. Also, David Brooks would like him. This meal just cost me $78 at Newark Airport. This is why Americans think the economy is terrible. Community note says, based on the similar table, glass, chair, sheet, and cut of fries, this is the Smokehouse restaurant at Newark Airport Terminal A. The burger and fries cost $17. Here's a question as well. I saw people, I want to hear what you have to say about this, chat. I saw people speculating that like the salad and the tomato there were like taken out of the burger. Like he didn't want it on his burger, so he took it out like a kid would do. I think that's a side salad. I think that's a little like a shitty side salad. What do you think? Do you think that came out of the burger? Or do you think it's a little side salad with the fries? He does eat like a child, yeah. Ketchup only. Ketchup only on the burger. Yeah, I think there's too much lettuce for that to be in the burger. I agree with that. Up the Red says it's wilted from the burger, though. Why is there a full tomato slice? That's true. That is a full... I didn't see that. I thought it was just a slice, but you see some red in there. I think that's a full tomato slice. You're right. salad, but he didn't eat it. I love yet just the ketchup on the burger is great. No steakhouse burger is going to come without lettuce and tomato. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. Anyway, that's pretty funny. He was probably just blasting those Long Island iced teas or whatever it is. Orb Lady said something a moment ago. Lucid says to look for the David Brooks piece from September 7th. The American Renaissance is already at hand. As China stumbles, Ohio rebounds. Huffing the copium. I'm trying to see what David Brooks wrote about the beer summit back in the day. Someone posted the meal from the Fire Festival in the David Brooks stud, and I remember laughing when someone back then reported that Commandant Ja had all the bourgeoisie trapped on the island was awaiting reinforcements. That would have been nice if that was real. That's a $61 scotch. What? Like, it's funny getting a $61 scotch and like a big glass of ice cubes too. I think he just had multiple of those. And if you have like a scotch on the rocks, is that supposed to be a big glass of ice? Like I thought that was like 1 or 2 cubes at the most. Like how would you make one of those? I'm not a big like scotch guy. My understanding is though you don't want to dilute it that much with like a big fucking glass of ice cubes. Especially if it's like a fancy scotch. You want to enjoy all the different notes or whatever. I would like to say that I'm currently enjoying a finely crafted caprese sandwich. That sounds very nice. I had a good sandwich before starting as well. A similar one that I had yesterday. But I ate it before going on the stream. Sitting next to David Brooks post scotch and a baby burger on a flight, reaching for the emergency hatch to get sucked out of the plane. So I'm just reading this thing now. Look at this. About Obama's like trying to have a drink with Republicans to bring people together. Talking about the beer summit. It would be easy to say Obama brought this boozy badgering on himself. He began, this is from a Daily Beast piece, the booze that saved America from 2014, and America was famously totally fine after that moment. It would be easy to say, I'm just going to put Brooks's tweet on there just so we know what we're talking about. It would be easy to say Obama brought this boozy badgering on himself. He began his first term by breaking bread and presumably popping corks with conservative writers David Brooks, Charles Krauthammer, and Bill Kristol over at George Will's house. This is the first thing Obama did. We got to get Brooks and Krauthammer and Bill Kristol together to show them that I'm not so scary. I want them to say nice things about me. That's Obama's primary concern as soon as his presidency starts. This historic presidency, in this unique moment in American history where all this change is possible, which he literally campaigned on the actual idea of changing things. And the first things he does, get Brooks over here. Get Brooks and Charles Krauthammer and Bill Kristol together so they know that I can be trusted. I'm not going to rock the boat too much. Please. Brooks later joked of Obama. The president said, David, which sort of wine would you like me to turn your water into? A zinger back then. You had to be there comment now. You know, Obama was like super proud of that line too. He was waiting to drop that. David, which sort of wine would you like me to turn your water into? Playing on the whole like savior cult of personality that had kind of like developed around him. The plebs, the hoi polloi, think that I'm some kind of higher being. Can you imagine? In the years to follow, the president invented a whole new arena of diplomacy, the beer summit, wherein people who have been slighted get to spend a happy hour or so telling the leader of the free world what's made them upset. This is from April 22, 2014. David Brooks's twisted manhood. Questioning Obama's masculinity isn't just racist, it's wrong. So this is amazing. This is like after trying to kiss David Brooks's ass from moment one in your presidency, here's what it gets you. Here's what it gets you, trying to kiss David Brooks's ass until he says nice things about you in the New York Times opinion column. This is Obama's primary like PR concern from moment one. This just in, New York, this is from Salon in April 22nd, 2014. This just in, New York Times columnist David Brooks and NBC's Chuck Todd want you to know that President Obama has a manhood problem, or at least the appearance of one. That's the conclusion of the two white men reached on Meet the Press on Sunday, following comments by another white man, Bob Corker from Tennessee, the ranking Republican on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Corker warned, I think we're going to lose Eastern Ukraine. Wow, that's actually interesting considering what's going on in Eastern Ukraine now. That I think we're going to lose Eastern Ukraine, which would be a geopolitical disaster resulting from an era of permissiveness the U.S. has created around the world. So you see, this is actually amazing because this ties into everything that we're talking about today. But that perception doesn't only belong to Republicans. It was international, Brooks claimed. So this is Brooks in the New York Times writing about Obama, on Meet the Press. Years later, even after Obama has tried so hard to court him and to kiss his ass. Basically, since Yalta, we've had an assumption that borders are basically going to be borders, and once that comes into question, if in Ukraine or in Crimea or anywhere else, then all over the world, all bets are off. And let's face it, Obama, whether deservedly or not, does have I'll say it crudely, but a manhood problem in the Middle East. Is he tough enough to stand up to somebody like Assad or somebody like Putin? I think a lot of the rap is unfair, but certainly in the Middle East, there's an assumption that he's not tough enough. So Obama spends all this time kissing David Brooks' ass, and then David Brooks, the fucking New York Times columnist who has never had a real job in his life and has certainly never had to go fight in a war, is on Meet the Press being like Obama's like being a not a man enough in the Middle. He's not killing enough people in the Middle East. He's not killing enough people. And what happened after this? They ramped up funding, pouring weapons and funding and arming Eastern Ukraine right after that, like directly around this time. This is 2014. So Obama kisses his ass, and David Brooks is still like, you're not killing enough people in Eastern Ukraine and the Middle East. Why are you not? Libya wasn't enough. The drone warfare program isn't enough. Afghanistan's not enough. Why are you not going into Syria? Why are you not going into Eastern Ukraine, Obama? And like, that's the sensible Republican guy, who's of course one of these sensible, moderate, never Trump Republicans, who we have to listen to always now because of their moderate views. That's what it got for Obama in 2014. Why are you man enough? Why are you man? You're not being man enough. You're not killing enough people. And then immediately there's a ramp up in escalations in Eastern Ukraine, leading all the way to the invasion of Ukraine by Russia in 2021 or whenever that was. Now I've already lost track. It was 2022, I think, early 2022. I mean, that's just like a perfect example of exactly what that kind of brand of pathetic, liberal, fake progressive politics that Obama was the master of, exactly what it gets you. He spent 8 years trying to bend over backwards, trying to appeal to conservatives and Republicans and making inroads and making deals with moderates and people that wanted to do business with him in the other party, while shutting down the left at every opportunity, shutting down any remote criticism from anyone on the left, and bending over backwards. You want to talk about border security? I'll deport more people than any other president in American history. And as much as we talk about Trump and deportations and family separations, that was Obama that created that grotesque system or escalated it to that extent. And when you deport more people than anyone else in American history, that is separating families. These weren't all just like criminals and gang members. These were like people that undocumented migrants had probably gotten a traffic ticket somewhere. They get ripped away from their families and deported. So then Obama can say to Republicans, now that I've done all this stuff, now we can come together on a sensible, bipartisan deal to protect, immigrants that we want, and the good immigrants, and the ones that have never caused any problems, and the ones that are the kids or that came here when they were kids that had no choice or whatever. And what did conservatives say? No, fuck you. You have open borders, and you're a communist and a secret Muslim. And that's what that gets you, That was his entire presidency, was just trying to make these people happy, trying to appease these people nonstop. And lo and behold, it just never happened. And then it led to them embracing Trump in the following election, and led to Trump's election because people were so disillusioned with what the Democratic Party, what their values were. And how could they not be? When he took over and people actually thought that it might lead to some good things for working class people in the United States for once, or it might actually lead to some kind of a different foreign policy for the United States for once. And none of that happened. And then 8 years later, they're like, fuck you. I'm certainly not going to go vote for Hillary now. And they didn't. Because he spent his whole presidency trying to appeal to the David Brooks of the world. There's a Valerie Jarrett retrospective. It talks about the process on ACA and how they had the votes from the start for what got passed. And even knowing that the Republicans gummed up the works for a year and threw a bunch of poison pill amendments into it, she was asked, would they do anything differently? And she says, no. Good. Yeah. Very good. Why do we always lose? Democrats just can't believe it. Why do we always lose? What a mystery. And then Obama loses to Trump. People around America are justifiably freaking the fuck out. And what does he do? He goes to jet ski with Richard Branson. And he just takes off and is like, well, I'm out. See you later. And goes to retire to his Martha's Vineyard mansion. And people wonder why they don't like the Democratic Party or they don't trust them. Anyway, it's interesting because that ties into everything we're talking about with Ukraine. Cause like that's it. He fucking, the United States government helps overthrow the neutral Ukrainian government that had issued that deal with the IMF and wanted to make a deal with Putin on cheaper Russian natural gas. The United States government under Obama and Biden orchestrate a color revolution and a coup that installs a friendly government. You know, they destroy Libya. They're still escalating in Afghanistan despite pulling out of Iraq. And it's not enough for the David Brooks of the world. They're like, why aren't you doing more? Why aren't you killing more people? We're going to lose Eastern Ukraine. Why aren't we arming and funding these any fascist militias in Eastern Ukraine? And then they that ramps up immediately after that kind of criticism. And that leads us to what's happening in Ukraine right now. And it's interesting because over the last couple of months, we've speculated about whether there is like an end in sight for Ukraine. We started to hear different kind of language coming from the State Department, coming from, I think, Mélanie Joly. There's been a few comments that have made it seem like there's starting to be more of a appetite for dialogue or de-escalation or whatever. And that actually doesn't seem like it's happening. It seems now like Zelensky just visited the UN, I think. He just met with Lula as well, which was interesting. We can talk about that. And it just seems like there's despite the fact that this counteroffensive has gone nowhere and has just been an absolute fucking disaster, and that thousands have died, as a result of this, it seems like all that's on the table is more and more escalation. It seems actually like Biden's going to turn that into a big campaign issue. We need to escalate, continuing to escalate, continue the nonstop support. And just turning this into a perpetual war zone, turning Eastern Ukraine just into a perpetual war zone. That seems to be what's on the agenda now. I'll speak to Putin, believe me. Believe me, Jack. So, we've got other stuff to look at, but I think this would be a good place to start. If we're going to talk about what is currently going on with Ukraine and whether there is any sign of that slowing down or an end in sight. I think if we ever thought, like we were starting to think that a couple weeks ago, but I think it's becoming more and more clear that that's just not on the horizon. I'll go back in time and pull out before I ever went in. The greatest political stunt you've ever seen. The greatest pullout. Beautiful pullout. My impression still needs work. Mac at Work supports my Trump impression, at least. At least someone does.
We need a new system. We need a new society. We need to demand that which may have sounded impossible even a few weeks ago, but is not only realizable, but an imperative necessity. Opening week of the UN General Assembly shows that we are indeed in a new era of global politics. Today we're going to talk about what President Zelensky of Ukraine said. We'll talk about what Joe Biden said, unveiling a new strategy, a new global strategy designed to break up the forming alliances of global South countries. And we're going to talk about the Ukraine war. Spoiler alert, it's about to escalate. Welcome to this week's episode of the Socialist Pro.
Is there an end in sight? No, only escalation. That's what we've talked about now for a year and a half. The only option that's ever on the table. I started to think that maybe there was something different coming down the horizon, but no, that's all the people of Ukraine and especially Eastern Ukraine have to look forward to.
Program. I'm your host, Brian Becker.
And even, sorry, I got to talk about John Fetterman. John Fetterman is getting a lot of like positive news stories. You have these psychos that are accusing him of being like a hologram or a double or a clone or whatever. You have the whole thing about the dress code and the Senate dress code. Fetterman has a lot of progressive ideas. He's been meeting with these union workers. Like he has a lot of good things in terms of domestic policy. And as you see, that's the very best you can ever hope for with anyone from the Democratic Party. He is a big time like Zionist, like Israel supporter, number one. And this tweet from him the other day, like with all this, like all these news stories about Fetterman, you know, a lot of people support him. These psychos are accusing him of being a clone. Like that's funny. And then he says that he has this to say about it. He says, if these jagovs in the House stop trying to shut our government down and fully support Ukraine, then I will save democracy by wearing a suit on the Senate floor next week. So, good. He's turning the whole, like, dress code, hoodie and shorts debate, which was a kind of a fun thing to get sidetracked on, and gave him a lot of goodwill. And he's like, you're not supporting Ukraine enough. I'll stop wearing shorts when you start sending even more weapons to Ukraine. Okay, good. Thanks, Fetterman. Thank you. If you assist our plan to turn Eastern Ukraine into just a permanent war zone, then I will wear a suit. Like, all right, good. It's just the absolute best you can hope for in terms of like progressives working within the Democratic Party. Absolute best you can do.
Today we're talking with Walter Smolarek once again. Walter is the editor of Liberation News. You can see his writings and those of the website at liberationnews.org. Walter Smolarek, welcome back.
Thank you very much for having me.
Walter, we have some video clips from President Zelensky and President Biden's speech at the UN General Assembly. I think they're noteworthy. Of course, Zelensky is pitching war, calling for an escalating war, talking about the need to expand rather than reduce nuclear weapons. He's about to go to Washington and meet with not only President Biden, but leaders of both parties. This time, not before both houses of Congress. It'll be behind closed doors. But when you look at what President Biden said, it was the unveiling of a new strategy. Again, I think the United States is alarmed about what's happening with BRICS countries and the emergence of perhaps a new movement of the non-aligned. Clearly, the United States is not going to accept that. Let's start, Walter, by playing a clip. This is Joe Biden in his presentation. We have several clips, but let's start with this one. Then I want to get your comments.
Like every nation in the world, the United States wants this war to end. No nation wants this war to end more than Ukraine.
Like every nation in the world, we want this war to end. You don't end a war by pumping more and more arms into the war. That's actually the opposite way of how you want to end a war. You don't end a war by starting to use like depleted uranium and cluster munitions and these kinds of things. That's not ending the war. That's escalating the war so it goes on forever. These are two totally mutually exclusive ideas. You can end a war through dialogue and discourse and negotiation and diplomacy. You don't end a war by flooding it with even more weapons and spending hundreds of billions of dollars ensuring there's this nonstop flow of deadly weapons going into the war. That's actually how you continue the war. Obviously Biden's been misinformed about this.
We strongly support Ukraine in its efforts to bring about a diplomatic resolution that delivers just and lasting peace. But Russia alone bears responsibility for this war. Russia alone has the power to end this war immediately. And it's Russia alone that stands in the way of peace, because Russia's price for peace is Ukraine's capitulation. If you allow Ukraine to be carved up,
I mean, that is how a war works.
The independence of any
generally
nation secure. I'd respectfully suggest the answer is no. We have to stand up to this naked aggression today
Like
and deter
that's
other
literally
aggressors
how
tomorrow.
a war works.
That's why the United States, together with our allies and partners around the world, will continue to stand with the brave people of Ukraine as they defend their sovereignty and territorial integrity and their freedom. It's not only an investment in Ukraine's future, but in the future of every country that seeks a world governed by basic rules that apply equally to all nations and uphold the rights of every nation, no matter how big or small. Sovereignty, territorial integrity,
Oh God,
they are the fixed foundations of this noble body.
this makes me want to
The
puke
universal
hearing
human
Americans
rights,
talk about
this
sovereignty.
North Star. We cannot
Ukraine is not
sacrifice
gonna,
either.
Western Ukraine is not going to be sovereign.
Well, in
Taiwan
one
is
sense, it
not
was
gonna
a
be
successful
sovereign.
speech, Walter, because Joe Biden didn't fall down.
Countries that are part of the Western sphere of influence are not sovereign. They're client. They want them to be compliant client states that shut the fuck up and do as they're told. That's actually the opposite of sovereignty. In a similar way that pumping arms and munitions and deadly weaponry into a war zone continues the war and actually escalates the war. Turning various nations around the world, whether it's Ukraine or anywhere else, into compliant client states that get totally stripped for parts for Western multinationals to sell off and privatize. That's the opposite of sovereignty. That's not sovereignty. Can't allow these countries to not become our lapdogs. That's right. Like South Korea, not sovereign. Japan, not a sovereign country. Canada, not a sovereign country. Australia, like America did a coup d'etat in Australia when they elected like a mild social democrat in the 70s. Countries that are under the United States imperialist sphere of influence are not sovereign. The current unit of subversive history presents a possible sliver of hope for this war. The unhinged circus of capitalist warfare peels back the veil on class distinction, and this phenomenon was crucial to the success of the Bolshevik Revolution. In my opinion, also to the development of the GDR, DPRK, and PR. Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about that before, right? How the World War One, I mean, the Soviet Union and the Russian Revolution was a direct result of World War One, and the formation of the PRC and the DPRK, like you're saying, and the GDR were direct results of World War II. I mean, that's what Mao said about World War III, right? He's like, that's what he viewed to be the final defeat of imperialism, in which a global socialist system will emerge. But I think the scary thing about that idea, though, is that this would have to get a whole lot worse before we get to that point. If we do get to a point where it is World War III, it's going to be really not good for millions and millions of people. Even if maybe, possibly, hopefully, something good could possibly emerge from that, it's still going to be a lot of misery to get to that point for everyone around the world.
He didn't, enunciate very well, but he did say most of the words that somebody had written for him. So in that sense, a big success story for Joe Biden. Of course, it's a pretty low bar when it comes to Joe. But there are some things there in that speech, well, many things actually, that just jump out at one because of their naked hypocrisy, but also the doublespeak and the innuendo and insinuation. Anyway, I want to get your take.
Completely. Yeah, I mean, there was Joe Biden doing his best to make words, and essentially what he was saying is that, this war is 100% on Russia's hands, and we are just nobly coming to the defense of poor Ukraine, who
Does
is the
anyone
victim
still believe
of
this?
aggression.
Seriously?
But this war was completely designed by the NATO powers. The circumstances that led to this war, that made this war
It's
inevitable,
remarkable that people
were of
actually
the United
believe
States
that.
is making, and everything that the U.S. government has done, everything that the Pentagon has done since the war broke out, has actually been aimed at prolonging the war and making it drag on and on and on endlessly. And the reason why the United States wants to do this, the reason why the Biden administration wants to make the war drag on, is because of what Lloyd Austin said. They want to weaken Russia. They calculate that the longer the war goes on, the more political and economic turmoil that creates for the Russian government, and it gives them a greater opportunity to diplomatically isolate Russia. They're not succeeding to nearly the extent that they would like to on those counts, but they do want the war to go forward because they see this as a strategic opening to achieve these long-running demands, which also include things like like making sure that their NATO allies in Europe stick very closely to the Pentagon and State Department line. I mean, the U.S. government likes this war. And the fact that tens of thousands of Ukrainians and tens of thousands of Russians are dying, and the fact that the life of every person on this planet is imperiled by the fact that these two nuclear armed powers are engaged in a proxy war with each other, the U.S. is engaged in a proxy war against Russia, that's of no consequence whatsoever to the people who manage the U.S. empire. The fact that Biden can go in front of the UN General Assembly and say, we want peace with a straight face, I mean, that's really incredible. It's an incredible exercise in hypocrisy.
Yeah, no nation wants this war to end more than Ukraine. Well, from the point of view of the Ukrainian people, that's probably true. But as you said, Walter, his opening sentences, like every nation in the world, the United States wants this war to end. Sending more weapons to Ukraine, and the U.S. is now going to send hundreds of millions, billions really, of more weapons, including escalatory weapons, and we're going to talk about what those might be, again, after they already sent cluster bombs, millions of cluster bombs, or at least hundreds of thousands of cluster bombs to Ukraine. These are obviously, that weapon foundationally is a crime against humanity because it's an indiscriminate weapon. But there are other elements of this talk that just really jump out at you. Nations, no matter how big or small, their sovereignty and territorial integrity must be respected. These are the fixed foundations of this noble body, meaning the UN. And I'm thinking, like, the U.S. invaded Panama in 1989. It invaded Iraq in 2001. It bombed Yugoslavia and threatened a ground invasion in 1999. That's how it broke up Yugoslavia. Then a year and a half later, the U.S. invaded Afghanistan for 20 years. And according to Brown University's cost of war report, 250,000 Afghans died. The next year, it invaded Iraq, and it still has U.S. troops in Iraq. You know, in 2011, it bombed the hell out of Libya and destroyed the Libyan government. It sent proxy forces into Syria, and U.S. troops are still in Syria. And then Biden gets up. All nations, no matter how big or small, their territorial integrity must be respected. Again, this is the doublespeak, the hypocrisy that the U.S. politicians, all of them, both parties, routinely employ. I want to go, though, Walter, as we continue.
You say insane that the Dems are the pro-war party now 12 years to do a complete 180. I mean, even that's not totally accurate because, like, I think a lot of Democrats, including Joe Biden, fully supported the Iraq war and only kind of started to turn against it when Bush became very unpopular and a lot of the facts came out about the completely falsified excuses for the war. But, I mean, Democrats still did, really support that and the Afghanistan war. We saw foreign policy under Obama continue to escalate in these really violent and brutal directions as well, with full support from people in the party. But I do think it's a longer process than that. I think you can point to the thing that I often point to is like Democrats in the 70s there was room to criticize the military establishment. There was a lot of room to criticize the CIA, to openly campaign against the CIA, and there was like the Church Committee and efforts to like bring the CIA to heel and examine what they were doing and bring that to light. There was a lot of Democrats that were like really involved in that. There was room for people in the Democratic Party to make these arguments. And now not only is there not room to even make these arguments, now that you've got actual former CIA analysts running in the party and like winning seats in the party in Congress and stuff and showing up on MSNBC to do commentary and that kind of stuff. Like, that's how far that's shifted. There was definitely in the past a sort of anti-war element in the Democratic Party or the liberal kind of establishment, the liberal movement. There was criticism of like American imperialism, and now it's just nothing. Now it's just full support. As even if they're the most progressive people in the Democratic Party, like a John Fetterman, like a AOC and Ilhan Omar, they're still fully supportive of like pumping weapons into Ukraine and escalating this conflict and supporting the CIA and supporting NATO. And I saw a thing from Ilhan Omar that she's like campaigning against sending these cluster munitions. So I guess that's the best you can really hope for when it comes to Democrats in Ukraine and foreign policy. We still support NATO. We still Russia bad, and we still support the nonstop flow of arms. But please, can we just not do the really bad war criminal weapons? That's basically the farthest left that you can possibly go when it comes to foreign policy in the United States now. So in the Democratic Party, yeah. So I think it's been longer than 12 years that process has gone on, but there has been a shift, like over the generations for sure, where even the mild criticism that was allowed before is no longer allowed. It's been a long time since my last long drive TRRS experience. Well, we're happy you're here. Johnny dialectically. Don't text and drive though. Don't chat and drive as usual. We'd rather them die conventionally, not in clusters, please and thank you. Exactly. That's the progressive foreign policy viewpoint now.
I want to hear, I have two clips to start with from President Zelensky because he's talking about escalation of the war. He's not talking about the war ending. Again, the war can end by going to the negotiating table and talking about Russia's very legitimate security concerns, meaning it doesn't want advanced U.S. conventional and nuclear missiles on its border, which is what will happen once Ukraine joins NATO. But anyway, here's Zelensky, the pitchman for the war, the salesman for the war.
We must act united to defeat the aggressor and focus all our capabilities and energy on addressing these challenges. As nukes
studying
are
English
restrained,
hard so we can.
likewise, the aggressor must be restrained and all
this
its tools
stuff.
and
PR
methods of
shit.
war. Each war now can become final, but it takes our unity to make sure that aggression will not break in again.
All right, Walter, just a couple of things there. We must act united to defeat the aggressor and focus all of our capabilities and energy on addressing those challenges. So not about peace. He's looking to defeat Russia. Okay, here's another one. Each war can now become final. This means like if they ultimately can defeat Russia, this is a new era of peace, very much like the way the politicians were selling World War I. And again,
half of the audience is thinking the aggressor is the
enemy,
USA.
the aggressor,
like we talk
meaning
about
Russia
often
in
up
this
the Reds.
case,
Like this is what
must
people
be
around the world
restrained
know.
and all his tools and methods of
People
war
around the world
restrained.
know that this.
Of course, that would be nuclear weapons.
People around the world, you know, as much as we say the world stands with Ukraine, like the rules-based international order, which is just all the predominantly white, Western, former colonialist countries. Everyone else in the world correctly recognizes the obvious truth that NATO was an aggressor in this war. Everyone around the world understands this. And so, yeah, when they see these speeches, people around the world like see through the hypocrisy of it.
Anyway, when you really parse the words, a very bellicose address by the leader of a country that is not looking for peace, it's looking to win this war.
Right, absolutely. That's what Zelensky wants as well. Zelensky wants the war to go on and on, that he receives, many, many tens of billions of additional dollars in military and economic assistance.
Like I said, he can't
and
do
that
anything other than
eventually,
that.
in some fantasy, will lead to the defeat of Russia on the battlefield. That's, a fanciful idea. I mean, there's certainly no indications that the Ukrainians are about to win this great breakthrough that, Zelensky is promising, that the corporate media is promising. But really what this shows is the stakes of this war. I mean, this is about the United States, the second largest nuclear armed power in the world, the one with, enough nuclear weapons to destroy the planet and wipe out all life on Earth many times over, pursuing a conflict with the other largest nuclear armed power. And Zelensky wants the world to go further and further and further down that road. It's unbelievably dangerous. And the reality is actually just the opposite. I mean, Zelensky is saying like, okay, well, if Russia can get away with it, then they're going to be emboldened to wage other wars of aggression. Well, what's really going to happen is if the United States gets away with this, if they're able to turn the war in Ukraine into a domestic crisis for Russia, I mean, that's going to be hugely emboldening for the Pentagon. I mean, they're the ones who are actually the source of war and instability and conflict in the world. And so Ukraine to them, and there are actually articles written that essentially state this outright. Ukraine is essentially a testing ground for the real battle, which is going to be with China over Taiwan. So I think that this really does have huge cascading consequences for the whole shape of the world. And if Zelensky gets his way, if Biden gets his way, that world is going to be much, much more dangerous and unstable.
One of the things that's clear from Zelensky's visit, and again, he'll be talking with both party leaderships in Congress
Canada
and with
after all
Biden
the
again in
endless
Washington tomorrow,
fucking support,
is he wants a major
cheerleading.
escalation. Zelensky is now demanding MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile Systems. That's the ATACMS. This is something that up until now the U.S. has said, no, we're not sending these weapons to Ukraine because they're going to be a big escalation. And if there's a big escalation, that means that Russia will also escalate. Russia's not going to lose this war. Russia's determined not to lose the war, and Russia has lots of weapons, including advanced conventional and nuclear technologies. It's not going to do it. But let's just talk about why
real Ukraine feels like the Spanish Civil War of the 21st century, but I don't know though, because like the Spanish Civil War had a side that like socialists could rally around. You know, the Republicans in that conflict. It was like it was a more of a stark conflict between an actual fascist government, and it was a rallying point for socialists around the world to go and fight this fascist government. And as much as this gets framed that way, I don't think that's the real reality of it. Because famously, if it was like the Spanish Civil War, like the Canadian government and the United States government stopped people from going to fight in the Spanish Civil War. They were like, no, we don't want to escalate that, because they supported Franco. And they're like, we don't want our citizens going to volunteer for the Republicans. Whereas this side, the supposedly good side that we would make that connection with, we're the ones giving them all the money and giving them all the weapons. It could be like the Spanish Civil War, and that's one of the smaller opening conflicts of World War. And I think that is, if that's what you meant, crackety cracken, then I think there's probably a lot to there, to that idea. As we've talked about often, it seems like that further escalation and further conflict is just kind of on the horizon. There's not a whole lot we can do about it. But I'll just say again, though, I mean, this comes up every time we look at this, but worth pointing out the whole thing about Ukraine being in NATO or not being in NATO, and the fact that, like, you know, that's a security concern for Russia, but what if so Ukraine is not in NATO, but they still have access. They're not a NATO member, but they still have this access to nonstop arms coming from NATO countries to support the war, which is the only reason they've been able to keep it going for this long. And functionally, like, and how can people, like, you take a look at that and think it's not a proxy war? It's like, what is the difference here? NATO troops are not going into Ukraine to fight the Russians. They're just giving all the weapons to Ukrainian people who are not in NATO and then sending them out to kill the Russians. Like, and then people say, describing it as a proxy war, as some kind of like propaganda or obfuscation. I mean, it's pretty fucking clear. Did you know that Stalin mass-printed War and Peace during World War II because it was pro-Russian propaganda about how Napoleon failed to invade Russia? No, I didn't. I've actually never read War and Peace. Gets them fired up.
The Biden administration so far, and the Pentagon has said, Lloyd Austin has said so far, no to the Ukrainians' demand for the ATACMS. But given the other, record of the past 18, 19, 20 months, Walter, every time the U.S. has said no to a weapon system that would indeed escalate the war, eventually the U.S. says, after initially saying no, they say yes, and they actually send these weapons. Let's start by talking about what this Army tactical missile system actually would allow the Ukrainian military to do.
Right. I think it's clear what they would like to do is to strike inside of Russian territory more often. I mean, the ATACMS missile system, this new advanced missile system that Zelensky is demanding, has a much longer range than the missiles that they currently have. The HIMARS missile system, people may have heard of, that's something that was another one of these forbidden weapon systems. It's a taboo because it would just be too escalatory. It's too wild of a move. But then the United States eventually started shipping these HIMARS missiles. The ATACMS missile system has a longer range, and they would be able to strike cities deep inside of Russia. They would be able to hit infrastructure targets deep inside of Russia, transportation, fuel depots. So this would be something that would greatly escalate the war because, of course, Russia would be forced to, as you were laying out, Brian, respond to that. The Ukrainian government intelligence forces have already begun organizing these, raids across the border, into towns that are, on the Russian side of the border across from Ukraine. There's been an increased use of drones to strike Russian cities, including Moscow. And so if they get this new missile system, they're going to be doing that, but to a much greater extent on a far greater scale. And one that would put, this is the calculation, would put Russia in a position where they would need to respond with an escalation in kind. The war would deepen. The prospects for a negotiated settlement would become even more remote than they already are. And the cycle will just keep going and going and going on. After they get this missile system, if and when they get this missile system, they'll come up with a new demand. They'll dream up something new. Maybe eventually they'll come back to the idea of a no-fly no-fly zone, which was something that was floated at the onset of the conflict. That would mean U.S. and other NATO powers shooting down Russian jets. I mean, is that the direction that we're headed? Possibly. I mean, certainly there's really no limit that we can observe so far as to how far the Pentagon will eventually go and the extent to which the Ukrainian government wants to push it.
Walter, I was in Denver and Boulder, Colorado, and then San Luis Obispo in LA this past week, addressing and basically talking about the war and the perspectives of the anti-war movement. And, you know, one of the points that I was making, and one of the points that we've been making on this show, is that while there are, according to the U.S. government's own surveys, maybe 500,000 casualties already in the war in just 19 months. I mean, when you compare that to Vietnam, where the U.S. in a 10-year-long conflict lost 58,000 U.S. soldiers, and that provoked a massive anti-war movement in the United States. As we all know, during the Vietnam War, millions of people were saying, why are we sending our sons and some of our daughters to fight thousands of miles away in Vietnam? Why? And it seemed like a war that had no chance of succeeding, no light at the end of the tunnel. And so there was this mass anti-war movement. And the point that I was making in this tour is that the main complaint now from the Pentagon is that Ukrainians are getting sick and tired of dying in big numbers. The euphemistic language that's being used by the government officials is that they fear that Ukrainians are becoming casualty averse, meaning averse to having their kids die in these large numbers. And I've been reading on this show some of the quotes from the mass media quoting anonymous Pentagon officials who say just that. Their main goal is to get the Ukrainians to accept the idea that they're going to have to keep fighting and dying. Now, if it was Americans who were fighting and dying, the other point I was making, because the U.S. government and the people of the United States especially are casualty averse, if the U.S. sends young Americans to go fight Russia in Ukraine, then the demonstrations that we've organized won't be in the many thousands, they'll be in the many hundreds of thousands. So the U.S. government and the U.S. politicians are casualty averse for Americans, but they don't want Ukrainians to become casualty averse because they need somebody to fight the Russians. They don't want a negotiated end to the war. They need somebody to fight the Russians.
That's a proxy war.
And if it's Ukrainians dying, no big deal. We can just shed crocodile tears, according to the basic narrative, shed crocodile tears for the poor Ukrainians, but it's fine as long as they do all the suffering. Meanwhile, the U.S. manufacturers of these weapons, including the Army Tactical Missile System, they're probably waiting in the wings too, Walter, to have the sort of inhibitions about using these escalatory weapons kind of evaporate. Before, the U.S. said they weren't going to send Ukraine M1 Abrams tanks, and then they sent them. They said they weren't going to send F-16 fighter jets, then they sent them. You mentioned the HIMARS system. They said they weren't going to do that. The precision rocket system, then they did that. Now, and recently they sent cluster bombs, which, as I mentioned earlier, are indiscriminate weapons. Most countries in the world won't possess cluster bombs because they consider them to be inherently a crime against humanity or a war crime, according to the rules of war, that have been outlined in the Geneva Convention. But here you have a proxy war, Ukrainians and Russians doing all the suffering, Americans, arms manufacturers doing quite well. And
my point about War and Peace is that there's a strong sense of pride that no one has successfully expanded into Russia. Yeah, and I mean, that's exactly why. Like, people look at Russia's motivations here and they just say Putin bad, and they fail to see any of these historical ties. But like, the idea that America and Canada has been funding, actual Nazi militias in eastern Ukraine, which is just, there's been plenty of reporting on this. It's not a conspiracy theory. And yeah, they said, no, we're not going to allow the West to fund actual Nazis. That was the way the Nazis invaded Russia in the first place, also, was through Ukraine, right? And yeah, they have this national pride about the huge amount of sacrifice that it took to defend themselves from Nazis during World War II, and the amount of people that were killed winning this war. And yeah, like, they're not going to just like allow NATO to walk right up to their border and fund these militia groups directly on their border. And they said time and time again that has to stop, or so there's going to be consequences. They said this over and over and over and over again, and we just kept pushing and pushing and pushing until that's exactly what happened. And then our only takeaway from that is Putin bad. Putin bad, so we must bravely send Ukrainian cluster bombs that are surely going to end up killing kids. Yeah.
Each new step with a new escalatory weapon system, because the aggressor must be defeated rather than negotiated with, it leads down the same road, and it's a road of ruin for the people of Ukraine.
Absolutely. The country has been completely torn apart by this war. Just to add one other thing to your list of escalations, I mean, depleted uranium shells are now being used by the Western-backed Ukrainian forces, and these are horrific weapons, not just on the battlefield, but because of the consequences for the civilian population. I mean, the United States used depleted uranium in Iraq, especially to essentially level the city of Fallujah. And women in Fallujah are told by their doctors, do not have babies anymore, because the fetal abnormalities, the fatalities, the mutations that babies have because of the extreme irradiation from these depleted uranium shells, that lasts for years and years and potentially even generations. That's of no concern to the Pentagon generals or to any of the people making the decisions to ship these terrible weapon systems, cluster bombs too, right? I mean, cluster munitions that don't explode or, just sit there for children to find years later. So again, clearly human life, not a factor here. And I think, to your point about how people in the United States experience this policy, right? It's different than Iraq or Afghanistan or certainly Vietnam or Korea, because the number of U.S. casualties, well, in this case, are non-existent in Ukraine, right? Because it's a proxy force fighting. But we have to think about what the trade-offs are for the $100 billion, maybe now it's going to be $124 billion that was sent to underwrite this war. I mean, think about all the people who are dying from preventable diseases, who are dying because they can't go to a doctor, or they weren't able to go to a doctor in time to catch a preventable disease, or have terrible health problems because they drink water that's contaminated with lead because of the sorry state of infrastructure in the United States, or people.
The Nazis attacked the Soviet Union along a 1,000-kilometer front, but their invasion of Ukraine was crucial to taking southern USSR, and then taking Crimean Peninsula was so important. Hitler had special medals made for the troops participating, and that's why current Russia is dead set on not giving up these areas, because it could still function as beachheads to an invasion, killing another 25 million citizens. And you don't have to like things that the Russian government does or what Putin does to acknowledge that basic historical reality, and just understand that, and they see the Ukrainian project of, like we talked about often, erasing that Soviet legacy, upholding the banderas, these anti-Soviet Ukrainian nationalists who carried out the Holocaust. They see that process taking place, all the Soviet monuments getting taken down. And it's you don't have to like Putin or Russia to acknowledge that, we're not going to allow these Nazis to invade our country. And we've talked about many times, the fact that we were arming and training and funding these fascist militias, that's not a Putin conspiracy theory. There's plenty of mainstream reporting on this that was going on for years and years prior to this invasion taking place. I know we're supposed to pretend that never happened, but it was. Depleted uranium is used in armor-piercing rounds. Lead is also really bad for the environment. That's why gun ranges exist. Yeah, well, that's how you stop the war, is by sending those kinds of weapons and munitions there. The point about birth defects in Iraq, there was that recent clip of the U.S. spokesperson claiming there's no evidence of harmful effects from the depleted uranium rounds. I mean, and these are the people lecturing everyone about how they need to stand on the side of the heroic innocent victims and stuff. I wish people would just understand the fact that if this was as simple as it gets made out to be, the Voldemort good versus evil kind of dichotomy that gets, or the dark side, Darth Vader, whatever fantasy bullshit that gets held up to talk about this war. If that was actually the case, the United States would not be supporting it, right? It's I feel just America just being involved should be enough to indicate to people, even people that don't like Russia for whatever reason, the very fact that NATO and the US is involved like this and are saying things like that should be enough indication to people that it's more complicated than what they're thinking it is. All the Bandera monuments are in Kiev and Western Ukraine and Canada. Gee, I wonder why Eastern Ukraine didn't find the ousting of the party they supported a good thing. Yeah, and people also point out as well, Eastern Ukraine, they voted for Zelensky. Zelensky was elected in like a huge landslide. He got a lot of support in that region. Why? Because he was talking about ending the conflict. He was saying, I'm going to end the conflict. And that's what people wanted. That's why people supported him. And then, of course, he realized, and they realized, that he doesn't actually have the power to do that. He didn't have the power to end the conflict when he was elected, and he certainly doesn't have the power to end it now. That's why all he can talk about is endless escalation, because the moment he starts saying anything different, he's going to be gone. Either assassinated or couped or gotten rid of. Maybe we'll move to Calgary. Using these, and yeah, that's true. Like, using these kinds of weapons show they're starting to run low, which shows they don't have the industrial capacity to quickly replenish. Yeah, I mean, that's evidence of that. Just the fact that, like, the young and untrained people getting thrown into the meat grinder, the old people that shouldn't even be there, like, they're running out of, like, cannon fodder, and they're running out of weapons. That's why they got to send this increasingly dangerous stuff and increasingly escalatory process. Yeah, Zelensky ran on a peace platform that he basically ignored when he got told to fuck off by the neo-Nazis. That's it. And that's why he's only talking about escalation now, because that's the only option that's on the table. That's all he's allowed to talk about. I also read something about how in Russia, Nazi has a different connotation than here. We think of the Holocaust and persecution of Jews, while they see it as more as an invading anti-Russia Soviet force. We dismiss that as pure propaganda because Ukraine is not entirely white supremacist, where they are speaking to it from a different POV. Yeah, but I mean, the fact remains that actual like Nazis in Eastern Ukraine that worship these the anti-Soviet nationalists and such as Bandera, who helped carry out the Holocaust and actually uphold that specific fascist ideology, have been getting NATO weapons and training now for years. So, like I've been saying since before this started, and when it started, and then after it started, whether you like Putin or not, you like Russia or not, that is a legitimate security concern to them. Like the idea that they're just going to give away the Crimea thing is a big example. Why did they go into Crimea? It must be because Putin is just pure evil. Whereas the idea that they're just going to give their largest warm water port and their largest military base, just hand it over to an increasingly hostile enemy directly on their border that used to be their closest ally. The fact that they're not just going to immediately go along with that is so perplexing to us. It's not actually that hard to understand. And Ukraine and Zelensky are saying, like, we need that. We're going to get that back. That's how the war has to end. We're going to get it back. We're going to get Crimea back. We're going to get all these eastern regions back, which is just permanent war zone. That's what that means, because that's never going to happen. Western Nazis have gone over to Ukraine and to train for for quite a while. I mean, that's one of the things we talk about often, like the blowback. The blowback already started. That Christchurch mass shooter in Christchurch, New Zealand, trained in Eastern Ukraine. Like, the blowback has already started. I'm sure it's going to escalate over the years until eventually we're at war with these people too. But it's literally already started. It's like it started before the conflict even started. Also, can't wait for the Nazis in Ukraine to trade these munitions to Nazis in other countries for things they need the U.S. disproportionately overlooks, like food and medical aid. That's true as well, and that's another whole thing, is that, like, we don't even know half the time where these weapons are going to begin with. Like, every shady arms dealer in the world has probably set up shop in Eastern Ukraine for the last 2 years at least. And we've already seen these munitions that are getting sent popping up all over the place elsewhere. There was that whole story a few months ago about how, like, we don't even know where half of these munitions are going, which they, of course, had to walk back when everyone got mad at them. Yeah, no, the tidbit about Christchurch is really important because we talk about the possibility of blowback. The possibility of blowback from the nonstop arm transfers to this region. But like it already happened. The blowback's already happening. That CBS story was taken down. Good stuff. Good. Very good. Let's continue this.
People might die because the bridge they're driving on collapses. I mean, these are also consequences,
you can count
albeit
on me.
indirect,
You're gonna have good
of
old
this type
Rob
of
to
warfare
talk you
state
through all
of the
this.
Thanks for your Ukraine Real Talk, Rob and community.
Pete Cicada, thank you very much. 9 months of tier 1. Very much appreciated. And it's my pleasure. I don't know. I think my stance on this stuff alienated a lot of people that maybe were once part of the community when this shit started, but you know, I don't think it's that controversial to be a Western leftist and not support NATO. I didn't think that was that controversial. I thought it was actually pretty easy to just not support NATO, whatever it is that NATO is doing, but this seems to have tripped up many of our potential or former comrades or allies. And the training and networking these Nazis do, not even the weapons themselves. Yeah, I mean, and now it's just escalating even more. Like it's really dangerous. Yeah, Vosh ruined many minds. Anarcho NATO Bidenists, like Jesus Christ, like come on. Come on, man.
this hyper militarism that we live under, and that affects in profound ways everybody's lives one way or another.
Well, another point that I've been making and we've been making on this show, and it doesn't get much media.
Really hard to find principled anti-imperialists, and that goes also on the other side, where you have a number of people that are principled anti-imperialists, and then because of the way that like the left or the liberal wing has supported all this stuff, end up tailing these dipshit right-wing reactionaries. So it's like, yeah, it turns into a very small pool of people that actually can maintain a sort of principled anti-imperialist stance while not falling into this like right-wing reactionary trap and thinking like Tucker Carlson is now your friend because Tucker Carlson says things about Ukraine that you agree with. Many people on all parts of this spectrum have completely failed this test, whatever this test is. Yeah, this is the LaRoucheite thing for sure, yeah.
Attention. If you look at the mainstream newspapers, well, do you think the main thing Americans care about is the Ukraine war and sending more weapons to Ukraine, and what Americans really thinking about Crimea or the Donbass, which is, absolutely not true. But the focus of the Biden administration is so on Ukraine, so on winning the war against Russia, weakening Russia, defeating Russia. We've been making the point that the U.S. government is cutting off funding right now for childcare, the childcare funds that were expanded during COVID. And 70,000 childcare centers, as we've said last week, are facing bankruptcy because they were dependent on those funds, the COVID additional relief funding. So that's 3.2 million kids are about to lose childcare.
Like that child tax credit is really important. And listen, Biden and them bragged about it. They bragged about reducing childhood poverty, which that childhood tax credit did. And they bragged about it, which, if you pass policies like that, you should brag about it. And now, on that level, though, it should be absolutely fair game to say under Biden, childhood poverty has like doubled in the last year. If they're going to brag about these policies that helped alleviate this horrible, serious issue, then they should own it when they sunset all these meager policies, and then childhood poverty goes back up. That's under their watch. And meanwhile, of course, we'll have nonstop. Yes, immediately, no debate, hundreds of billions of dollars to Ukraine, no problem. You don't think people around the country recognize that? And recognize how they're getting fucked in that arrangement? And Biden's going to go ahead and campaign on even more support for Ukraine. Is there going to be an appetite for that in America when you have probably Donald Trump saying, like, we got to get out of Ukraine and whatever he's saying? It's not hard to see how that's going to go.
And that's another consequence. Like all of these decisions by the U.S. government to spend money endlessly for war, and it's not just the Ukraine war, it's all of the wars in aggregate. I mean, the bigger part of the federal discretionary spending, not the so-called entitlement
Yeah,
programs
Zelensky,
like Social
openly
Security,
threatening people
Medicare,
now about it.
et cetera. But the discretionary spending, which is based on our taxes or people's taxes every year, more than 50% of it goes for the so-called defense budget. And of course, the Defense Department used to be rightly called the War Department. But then as the U.S. created a permanent war machine.
The libs just parrot rhetoric from the U.S. State Department with Ukraine proxy war. Nothing learned from Iraq. And in fact, when you call it a proxy war, you get called a Putin propagandist, despite the fact, like we're talking about, like all the nonstop flow of arms. You have Lindsey Graham saying like, yeah, the Ukrainians are killing Russians. We love it. What a great investment. We have things like U.S. officials saying like they become casualty averse and promoting this whole like counteroffensive, and people still can't see that that's a proxy war. It's really that hard for them to understand. And again, everyone around the world that's not America and Canada and Western Europe and Australia recognizes correctly that it's a proxy war because it's not actually that hard to wrap your mind around, except when you're a deeply propagandized empire baby.
After World War II, they decided to name it the Defense Department. And so the budget became the defense budget. Because if you ask people to endlessly give over their tax dollars for war, it sounds like you're going to war.
Yeah, history
but if
doesn't
it's for
matter,
defense, then it
and
sounds
yeah, I saw that as well. That tweet from B-Day Marksman, Karma Social Distancing. I would recommend people check out that thread. It is kind of interesting.
like you're actually protecting people, and especially the American people and the American homeland. So it's part of a Madison Avenue sales job to call war spending defense spending. But, this is another element of it. More than 50% of the discretionary budget is paying for war and also for the debt service for earlier wars. Because when the wars are being fought, like the war in Vietnam, Johnson and Nixon didn't want to immediately raise taxes in order to pay for the war spending. So what they did is they borrowed the money with the idea that some future president under some other administration would have to pay the service charge, the interest.
That's so delusional,
on the debt
Diego.
that for the money that was borrowed to finance the war in the first place. So you have immediate defense spending, so-called war spending. Then a bunch of that spending is hidden in other agencies like the Department of Energy, which has authority over nuclear weapons. And the U.S. has spent maybe $12 trillion on nuclear weapons since 1942. And then you have the debt service on interest to the banks, who are also additionally profiting from war spending. It is a warfare state.
Yeah, absolutely. And add to that the Department of Veterans Affairs. I mean, of course, people who are sent as the human material for these conflicts should receive all the care that they need, but they wouldn't need all of this expensive medical care if the wars weren't created in the first place. And that's a giant annual expense as well. So the fact that, this happens every year in Congress, this is funded every year in Congress with hardly any debate. Or like right now they are debating it, but it's over just these ridiculous sort of electoral gimmicks around, quote unquote woke politics. But the actual substance of it, like, are we going to spend $1 trillion or so to kill people and threaten to kill people all around the world? That's never seriously discussed or debated inside of Congress. Certainly the Senate is going to have no problem signing the check, however big it is, for Ukraine war spending. There are some demagogic far right politicians in the House who might posture as being opponents of this particular war, and certainly not war in general. But they're all basically united. I mean, it's the old saying in U.S. politics, politics stops at the water's edge, meaning, we can debate about domestic policy, but everyone who's responsible is on the same page that the United States should be a global empire capable of controlling everything that goes on in the whole planet. So I think that speaks to the fact that the people of the United States, who are actually not for these policies, right? They're certainly not for this policy in Ukraine of just endless, unlimited military spending, because the politicians in Washington have absolutely no interest in doing that and representing the views of their actual constituents. The people who they represent, perhaps these are their actual constituents, are the executives at Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Raytheon and all of these corporations that profit both from the direct sale of weapons and all of the, the aftermath too, right? I mean, the quote unquote reconstruction of Ukraine, corporations are already salivating over that. There are bankers who will underwrite all of that, who will, sign off on loans and collect interest. The entire billionaire class benefits in one way or another from this warfare state. They control the politicians. And so we have to struggle. We have to fight. It's not enough just to ask nicely.
No, and I'm glad you mentioned that. Going back to Biden's original speech, the clip that we played, he said, Ukraine, it's not only an investment in Ukraine's future. Even that language, it's the language of an investor class that sees Ukraine, this very big country, what had been the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, rich agricultural area, to be like a source of investment. And you see the Zelensky government has basically been privatizing everything. I mean, they rounded up the political opposition. You know, many political figures and parties in Ukraine opposed the 2014 coup that the U.S. sponsored. They opposed the takeover, or not complete takeover, but the big impact that fascist forces in Ukraine have on the country. Those people have been locked up. They've been put in prison. The parties on the left, like the Communist Party of Ukraine, banned. But those forces existed in Ukraine,
though, Rob.
And now they've been basically
Ukrainian
they're
leftists
basically
are fighting with
shut
Azov.
down. And so you have Zelensky in the new government, which is functioning as a not only pro-NATO but a neoliberal government, privatizing everything. Ukraine is for sale, and the U.S. has invested since the collapse of the Soviet Union, when Ukraine became, quote, independent for the first time. Many, many, many billions of dollars, even before the 2014 coup. Victoria Nuland had said at that time, and she was the cheerleader for the coup, the U.S. had put $5 billion into Ukraine since 1991. She said it's for democracy. Walter, it's for a noble cause. It wasn't for a neo-colonial takeover of this vast, rich country, rich meaning rich in natural resources. It was for something great and noble like democracy. Anyway, I want to go back to Zelensky's visit and get your take on this tomorrow in Washington. Last year, he was in front of both houses of Congress. You know, it was like the State of the Union address. I mean, Netanyahu's done that. Zelensky did it. Usually it's reserved for the president doing the State of the Union address. But this year it's behind closed doors. And I want to get your take on why you think it's a little bit, smaller in terms of the hoopla production, and what that indicates, because I think it does indicate something about what's going on in the country.
Certainly. I think the war has become much less popular. The proxy war in Ukraine has become much less popular. And this is typical of wars, right? I mean, when they break out, there's this sense of hysteria that's consciously generated by the corporate media, that's consciously generated by politicians. And it's designed to create this sense in society, this immense social pressure, essentially, to say that you are for the war, right? It makes you, a bad person to not be for the war, because why wouldn't you be for coming to, little Ukraine's assistance against this aggression? But over time, as the consequences of the war become more real, the human and the material consequences of the war, it's also typical for there to be a shift in public opinion in the opposite direction, against the war. And I think that's exactly what we're seeing inside of the United States. Now, in Congress, the main representatives of that are these far-right figures like Marjorie Taylor Greene and others, Matt Gaetz, for instance. And so that, explains why it's not a joint session of Congress, because those far-right wingers have a lot of leverage over McCarthy, the Speaker of the House. So it's really mainly going to be senators this time. But I think that actually says more about the Democratic Party and liberals than it necessarily does about, a so-called realignment inside of the Republican Party. Because the fact that there is this shift, this clear, unmistakable shift in public opinion away from the war, and that there are essentially no, quote unquote, liberal doves who have decided to give voice to that, to, even in their own narrow, political career interests, take advantage of that. I mean, it says something about how ironclad the consensus within the Democratic Party is around what, could be called neoconservative ideas, an extreme hardline militarist approach to foreign and military policy, that the Democratic Party is completely united around. I mean, maybe there's a little bit of differences over certain issues, but the fact that this that expression of this growing opposition in society is actually only manifesting itself in a fringe of the Republican Party, I think should really give pause to anybody who thinks that the Democrats are a vehicle to make social progress or to raise progressive demands, because it's completely 100% won over in lockstep to this new Cold War attitude against Russia that, as we've been talking about, is so profoundly dangerous.
Yeah, and of course, there is the left, the Answer Coalition and other anti-war, anti-imperialist forces, the People's Forum, and others who have been working together to build grassroots opposition to the war. And in the case of the Answer Coalition, tens of thousands of flyers and pamphlets were handed out when the U.S. was promoting the idea of a no-fly zone, which many people thought, well, no-fly zone means that Russian planes can't attack Ukrainians. That's good. It's peaceful. It protects Ukraine. Where a no-fly zone means the U.S. commits itself to shoot down Russian planes. And of course, that would mean a global conflict. That would mean actually a new era, a new epic of the war, which would be a war between the United States and Russia. It would not be a proxy war. So Answer Coalition's been in the streets organizing, in addition to that speaking tour I was on. People have been in the streets demonstrating, creating anti-war contingents at environmental events. I mean, there's lots of activity going on, but you don't see it in the mainstream media. None of it's reflected in the capitalist media. The only anti-war attention that's gets any attention in the media are these far-right, semi-fascist forces like the ones you mentioned, who are not really anti-war. They're just demagogues. They'll say anything, but they at least know that their base doesn't really support the Ukraine war. And frankly, Walter, if and I hope that the anti-war movement, the left, progressive, anti-imperialist, anti-war movement succeeds in this, if we get out to all of the communities, not just people voting Democrats, but also the people who vote for Trump or vote Republican, and tell them or ask them, you know, what would you rather do in the spending of your tax dollars, your hard-earned tax dollars? 70,000 child care centers are about to be closed. And instead of funding them, the U.S. is sending the hundreds of millions of billions of dollars to Ukraine. How would you prefer to use your money? Many people, many working class people who vote Democrat or Republican would support the anti-war movement. That's why the mainstream media keeps the progressive anti-imperialist forces out of the mainstream media. That's why left third-party candidates are excluded from the debates, because actually the message will resonate with huge parts of the country. But we don't hear from them. We don't hear from the left revolutionary or radical socialist anti-imperialist activists. They're barred from the mainstream media. And you don't really get to hear the voices of normal people who are not political, but who, just instinctively don't like this policy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the reason why it's so dangerous for the powers that be, for the elites, the millionaires and billionaires, for that type of message to get out is because what essentially we're saying on the left wing of the anti-war movement, the radical socialist-led anti-war movement, is that you should think of yourself as a worker first. You're a regular person living in the world. You're not an American with the same interests as the CEO of Lockheed Martin and Raytheon or bankers on Wall Street. You're actually a worker, and your interests are pretty much the same as the workers in Russia and the workers in Ukraine and the workers in every country around the world, in the sense that you want peace. You have no interest. I mean, no worker in the United States benefits from NATO expanding further and further into Eastern Europe, right? I mean, like nobody sits down at the dinner table and thinks about their problems and their family's problem. And we're like, oh, well, if only the Baltic states were incorporated into NATO, if only Georgia was incorporated into NATO, then all of my problems would go away. That's ridiculous. Does not exist. Those are the problems of the people who run the planet and want to maintain their stranglehold over the planet. So what we're saying to people is think about your own problems first. And those problems are pretty similar to problems in Ukraine and problems in Russia. And they can all be remedied if we have peace, not more war, not an escalation, and not a foreign policy, which is what the United States has adopted for decades, a foreign policy that forces countries into a position where they feel like they have no option but to wage war, that makes war inevitable. Yeah,
we need a new system, Walter, as we say here on the Socialist Program. And a new system is possible, but we have to fight to get it. I want to go back to another part of what President Biden said. It's interesting because this is the unveiling of I believe, a new strategy by U.S. imperialism towards the emergence of BRICS and the countries that we now call the Global South, some of which have very, very large economies. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, the 5 members of BRICS who just had their summit before the BRICS was expanded with 6 more countries. Their aggregate gross national product is greater
of
than
Liberation News,
the gross national product of the G7, the former colonizers of the world.
Writes for a lot.
And the biggest imperialists, United States, Canada.
They're connected to PLS and the whole Breakthrough News network.
Britain, France, Germany, Italy, and Japan. So BRICS is emerging, BRICS is expanding. Many, many countries want to join BRICS. And, I think it's taken American imperialism, U.S. imperialism by surprise, because when the proxy war started in February 2022, I think the calculations of the U.S. were something like this. We're going to refuse to acknowledge Russia's demands or red lines to not incorporate Ukraine into NATO. And, Jens Stoltenberg and the leaders of NATO, we could go through and I could quote them saying, those were Russia's demands to have peace, and we rejected them. They rejected them. They could have had a peace deal with Russia then, just by allowing Ukraine to be independent, neutral. And Jens Stoltenberg, and this was echoed by Jake Sullivan and other U.S. officials, they said, no, Russia cannot tell NATO who can join NATO, and Russia cannot tell Ukraine what alliances it can join or not join. This is some sort of God-given right. Nothing can be more important than the right to join NATO. So we said no to them. And I think they figured over time, Russia would decide, well, war is coming because NATO expansion isn't stopping. We're going to fire the first shot. We'll move first. I think they also expected a military offensive by the Ukrainian military at that time, right towards the end of February 2022. So we'll fire the first shot. We won't be on our back heels. But then the U.S. and NATO could say, see, Russia is the aggressor. And that's exactly what you want to do in terms of public opinion. have your enemy appear to be the aggressor. The United States, when it invades Vietnam, invades Iraq, invades Afghanistan, looks like and is the aggressor. You know, giant parts of the world stand up against U.S. imperialism. But if you can get your adversary to fire the first shot, then it's kind of perfect, right? So I think the U.S. calculation was get Russia to fire the first shot, then have a long war. Russia can't really win, but, won't be defeated, but can't really win because the U.S. has really buttressed the Ukrainian military so much. So over time, this will weaken Russia, will sanction Russia. Russia will be pushed out of the world economy. And then one of the two major powers that we've identified for major power conflict, China and Russia, one of them, Russia in this case, would be weakened. But that didn't really happen, Walter.
No, it did not.
What happened is that Russia was stronger, more prepared, more formidable, and big parts of the world looked at the Ukraine war as sort of the outbreak of, not the outbreak, but the emergence of a multipolar world, replacing the 30-year-long stretch of U.S. unipolar domination.
One thing that I find interesting about that point, Alice McGee, is that if what we've heard about Ukraine joining NATO is that privately they were being told, no, you're not going to join NATO, but publicly they wanted to keep the options open. Publicly, they never said, even though Russia just repeatedly said, someone come and make an absolute assurance that Ukraine's not going to join NATO. That's what they were telling Ukraine privately. But publicly, they were never able to make this assurance because they still wanted to use that ship to continue provoking Russia. And it's not quite as simple as that, like joining whatever alliance they want. Like when you see the way that America has coerced other nations to be part of their economic system using tools like the IMF or institutions like that. You say the same thing. I mean, it's a U.S.-led military alliance. America pays 75% for NATO, and they've been steadily advancing this alliance right up to the border of Russia, including all these former Warsaw Pact nations. It's not just this nice democratic, well, we're just deciding to make these decisions. It's it's been a specific project to expand directly up to the border like that. It's not just we just happen to, all these countries just want to have an alliance with us. I mean, that's not really what has been going on. They've been specifically pushing for this. And they deliberately and specifically and undemocratically overthrew all those former Soviet republics in the first place. I'm not surprised about Finland and Sweden asking to join, considering their whole fascist predilections as well.
And many countries in the third world, or so-called third world, what we now call the global south, thought, well, multipolarity is better because at least we have variety, we have options, we have choices. It's not like an anti-imperialist reaction to the U.S., but just the idea that not being dictated to. So now the U.S. is kind of alarmed that 18
Germany
months into the
haven't demanded a response to the Nord Stream sabotage. That's how firmly in the pocket of the U.S. they are. And that's been a big part of this war, right? Not even about weakening Russia, but weakening the EU too, and making sure that the EU doesn't have ties with Russia, is not buying Russian gas, but is firmly in the Western camp and is buying fracked gas from the United States. That's been a big part of it, is getting the EU under their heel. It's not just been about subjugating Western Ukraine or weakening Russia. It's about subjugating the entire EU. Yeah, Victoria Nuland says it herself, fuck the EU. That's their attitude about it.
War, this battle which Biden last year framed as a war between democracy and autocracy, a global war between good and evil. Biden dropped all of that stuff at the UN speech this time. He didn't mention autocracy versus democracy one time, not once. Instead, he's starting to sound like the champion of other countries and parts of the world, the global south, that in the past years, he would have condemned as an autocracy, but now because they're competing in the new circumstance with Russia and China and with BRICS, they're sort of like, no, we want to be your friend. We don't care really what form of government you have. So they're orienting a lot towards India, South Africa, renewed interest in Saudi Arabia, some of the countries that are either in BRICS or wanting to join BRICS.
But why not invade them as well? Also, I mean, one could argue many countries today have questionable governments in charge. But I think you're ignoring Ukraine's long-standing relationship with Russia. Whereas like they couldn't really make the claim that like Finland or Sweden is part of Russia. Maybe some extreme Russian nationalist might make that argument, but Ukraine was like one for a long time part of Russia. Even when it was a separate Soviet republic, it was the largest republic outside of Russia in the USSR. It was their close ally for decades and decades and decades. Millions of Ukrainians joined the Red Army to defend the USSR from fascism. Like we were saying before, it was a key entrance point to the fascist invasion of Russia in the first place in World War II. Like Crimea as well, and that's the site of their largest military base, and they're one of their 2 warm water ports. So there's very specific historical and geostrategic reasons, that they considered Ukraine a red line in terms of their becoming kind of a Western proxy or part of NATO. They consider Ukraine a red line, but they don't consider Sweden or Finland to the same extent because of these very clear historical and geostrategic reasons.
Listen to this clip. I want to play this clip from Biden talking about Vietnam. And I want to remind everybody, the U.S. went to war in Vietnam, and 3 million Vietnamese died before the U.S. was defeated in Vietnam by the National Liberation Movement and expelled from Vietnam. But listen to how Biden frames it here again at the UN, and I think this is indeed the unveiling of a new U.S. strategy.
Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, my fellow leaders.
It's
About
funny,
a week
Brandon,
ago,
at high speeds like
I
this.
stood on the other side of the world, in Vietnam, on soil once bloody with war. For decades, it would have been unthinkable for an American president to stand in Hanoi alongside a Vietnamese leader and announce a mutual commitment to the highest level of country's partnership. But it's a powerful reminder that our history need not dictate our future. With the concerted leadership and careful effort, adversaries can become partners. Overwhelming challenges can be resolved, and deep wounds can heal. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary.
Walter, I have to leave now and go and throw up. I mean, it is so disgusting and gross. It shows that deep wounds can heal. Well, the only way that wound healed is the United States was expelled from Vietnam based on the heroic armed resistance of the Vietnamese people. Supported by tens of millions of people in the United States and other Western countries who were in the streets demanding an end to the aggression committed by the United States. I mean, it wasn't just that wounds healed. Vietnam won. Vietnam won. And the only reason the United States today, Walter, is back standing with Vietnam and talking about how they can become friends and partners. You got that language, right? They were going to be partners. That's what Biden said. Well, the United States didn't do that hasn't done that with Cuba, didn't do it with, Venezuela, but with Vietnam, suddenly they want to be friends. Well, that's because they don't want Vietnam to be part of this new global South network of of countries that are basically becoming completely independent of the United States or trying to become independent of the United States. So now Biden is trying to say to the Vietnamese and to other countries in Asia, you can be our partner, just don't be China's partner. Again, it's part of a geostrategic shift. The battle between, quote, autocracy and democracy, good and bad, we're good, you're all evil, that's given way now. And the U.S. Government realizes it's on the back foot. And now this speech at the UN, I think, represents one indication that the U.S. is shifting its strategy. Same with India, by the way. The U.S. is really courting India. Biden was like loving Modi at the G20 meeting. They want to break Vietnam and India away from any sort of relationship or close relationship with China.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's also related to this economic strategy of decoupling with China. It's a restraining factor on the Pentagon war hawks, the fact that U.S. businesses and Chinese businesses do a lot of trade with each other. And so they think, well, if we can essentially exploit labor in Vietnam the way that we used to be able to, really underpay people in China, then that'll be, that'll make our supply lines more resilient, our supply chains more resilient. And Vietnam can be the center of low-wage manufacturing that China once was. But we can't do that now because China is actually developing. Their workers want to be paid more, and we want to have a new Cold War with them. So that trade makes us nervous. It's all a cynical manipulation driven by the interests of U.S. corporations and U.S. war planners and U.S. imperial, quote unquote, diplomats. Yeah, I mean, the personal hypocrisy too, I think, is completely disgusting. I mean, Biden was actually elected to the Senate in 1972, so he was in the Senate as the U.S. government was committing genocide in Vietnam. I mean, he was a part of that genocidal regime. Also during the Iraq War, like Biden talks about sovereignty and territorial integrity and how it's so horrible that Russia is violating Ukraine's territorial integrity. I mean, he was also in the Senate during the Iraq War, and when he was in the Senate during the Iraq War, he proposed the partition of Iraq into a Kurdish, Sunni, and Shia states.
He
said,
whipped
let's
Democrat
take Iraq,
votes
one
for the
country,
Iraq War
and
as
turn
well.
it into
He was
3
an
countries.
enthusiastic
So there's
supporter of the
absolutely
Iraq
no
War.
moral or principled stand that underlies any of this. It's all about what is the most that the U.S. empire can get from any other country under the given international circumstances. And the fact that the international situation is changing, it's changing in a way that's favorable to the underdeveloped, formerly colonized countries of the world. The U.S. does actually have to give better terms a lot of the times, offer better terms. And that's something, that's to the benefit of most people in the world. I mean, it's not socialism, it's not, freedom and liberation for the working class, but it does improve the situation in very meaningful and important ways.
All right, I want to turn to 2 other clips. One is Biden talking about Libya, which is, again, just a disgusting demonstration of doublespeak. Normal, though, imperialist doublespeak. And then Zelensky echoing sort of some of the same comments. So you see that Zelensky, who's the pitchman for the war, and Biden, who really isn't capable of being the pitchman really for anything, but as the sitting president of the United States, does have to mouth the words, the scripts that have been written for him if he can. And again, the victory for Biden at any given moment is, does he not fall over? Is he able to get like most of the speech out? Can people kind of sort of hear his words and understand them? So, it's a low bar for success from the point of view of performance.
Brian fucking hates
but from the point
Biden.
of view
I
of
love
politics, which I think is not in his delivery, but in the words that other people have written for him, the words of the state, the words of the capitalist imperialist state. Again, it's so disgusting, so hypocritical. I want to play this clip. It's about Libya. Listen to this.
Tragic flooding in Libya. My heart goes out to the people of Libya that's killed thousands of people. Together, these snapshots tell an urgent story of what awaits us if we fail to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels,
which we're not doing.
To climate-proof the world. For one day, my administration, the United States, has treated this crisis as an existential threat from the moment we took office.
Yeah, existential threat. Walter, the U.S. bombed Libya starting March 19th, 2011. They bombed Libya every day. Biden was then vice president of the United States. Obama was the president. They did it to carry out regime change in Libya, just as they had done in Iraq and what they had hoped to do later in Syria, to destroy the governments that owed their existence to the anti-colonial project and governments that had been in one way or another an ally of the former Soviet Union or then later Russia. Thousands of Libyans died. The country was made government-less. A civil war broke out. Then the U.S. completely exonerates its own responsibility for what happened to Libya. And BBC News, another imperialist media outlet, said this week it wasn't just a natural disaster with the flooding in Libya. It was the years of mismanagement and failure to attend to infrastructure.
He seemed pretty sharp in this speech. He gets fired up when the PMCs load him up with ice cream. It just depends when they give him the good amphetamines. When they really need him to perform, they jab him with the really good stuff. But he doesn't always get it, right? He can't do it every day, or else you get addicted to it. You get used to it. But when they really need him to come through, they give him the really good stuff. The really good presidential amphetamines.
Well, there used to be a very effective government in Libya. It was the government led by Gaddafi. And it was destroyed by the United States, Britain, and France. They bombed it. And then when Gaddafi, the 70-year-old head of state, was lynched in the streets, Hillary Clinton, who had been Secretary of State was the Secretary of State during the Obama administration in the same time period, the first 4 years. She said that very day, she said, we came, we saw, he died. And she was giddy. She was literally giggling and laughing about the execution, the lynching in the streets of a head of state. And now you have these same imperial politicians crying crocodile tears for the people of Libya.
Here's your favorite ice cream served. That's a good boy. Here comes another bite. Here it comes. It's like drizzling down his face. Give it a little wipe. 20 minutes later, he's ready to go.
They can thus exonerate or cover up, whitewash their own role in the suffering and death and destruction that is ravaging Libya and Libyan people.
And again, Libya as well, and Syria, the exact strategy of arming and funding extremists. You know, that's what I don't get about how people don't understand this whole proxy war concept. I mean, I do understand because Ukrainians are white, so they don't view them as being extremists in the same way they do Libyans or Syrians, but it's the same thing. You go after a government, you don't destabilize a government that you don't like. You arm and fund and train these extreme reactionaries to fight in civil conflicts, civil wars in the nation that's the target until it gets destabilized enough that you get your result. You know, it's the same strategy they've been doing over and over and over and over and over again for decades. And still people can't see it. They still have a hard time wrapping their mind around this.
It's incredible. It's incredible that he would have the gall to get up there in front of the whole world at the United Nations and lie like that. I mean, of course, the reason why 10,000, 15,000, maybe even 20,000 people died in this horrific flooding in Libya is because there is no central government anymore. There could have been early warnings. There could have been more maintenance done to these dams. There could have been an evacuation plan in place. And the reconstruction effort is also and rescue effort is being horrifically hampered for the same reason that NATO destroyed Libya's government, and in its place was chaos, was not even, like a stable proxy puppet regime, but actually just chaos where different militias would rule different sections of the country. They would form shifting alliances with each other. I mean, there are two separate, fully fledged, quote unquote governments with cabinets, with competing legislatures based in different cities in the country. Slavery as an organized industry reemerged in Libya, all because they made that decision in 2011 to annihilate the central government and to shred Libyan society by plunging it into chaos and ensuring that chaos continued. That's had cascading consequences all across the region. So much of the fighting and suffering in the Sahel throughout North Africa is in one way or another the result of the war in Libya and its fallout. And everybody who is involved in that is a criminal, is a war criminal, has committed crimes against peace, and that's how history is going to remember them.
Yeah,
the last thing I want to say is that it's just so disgusting that Biden essentially tried to posture as like, this is about climate change. Like this is about climate change, and I have a responsible, mature, grown-up position on climate change. I think the world should take action to address it. Well, climate change is
talk
something
about
that
the fact that we believe the scientists and then we don't do anything about it.
Dangers of a world that already has lots of injustices and dangers. This imperialist-dominated world order, where some countries are kept in poverty and underdevelopment, so that the bankers and corporations in the Western countries can grow rich. That interacting with climate change. That's what really causes the suffering. That's what creates an existential risk for humanity. And Biden is intentionally hiding behind that.
All right, I want to play one final video clip. It's Zelensky again at the UN General Assembly demonstrating that he is the loyal servant of the United States propaganda machine in his presentation about world politics. Again, not a friend of the truth, but certainly a friend of the Washington propaganda machine. Again, this is Zelensky assigning blame for what happened to Syria, which was indeed ripped apart by the United States and Saudi Arabia and Turkey and its right-wing, very, very right-wing allies, including Al-Qaeda in Syria. But no, according to Zelensky, the propagandist for Washington, it's just the opposite. Let's listen to this final clip.
Russia turned Syria into ruins. And if not Russia, the chemical weapons would have never been used there in Syria. Russia has almost swallowed Belarus. It is obviously threatening Kazakhstan and other Baltic states. And the goal of the present war against Ukraine is to turn our land,
Syria,
our people, our lives, our resources into a weapon against you.
Okay, that's just
you got to be careful because now you're tempting the Assad curse as well. I don't know if he wants that smoke.
Complete upside down version. I mean, the United States bombed and destroyed the Libyan government, and immediately, because they were so successful, having killed the president, the head of state of a sovereign government, the government that had the largest oil, the country that had the largest oil reserves in Africa, they immediately moved on to Syria. And that's when the United States, working with Turkey, the CIA, one of its biggest operations, funneled tens of millions of dollars of weapons into al-Qaeda and other right-wing forces who were trying to overthrow the government of Assad. And the Russians finally intervened in, I think, either late 2014 or 15, and said that they were going to stand with the Syrian government, unlike Libya, where they abstained. The Russians abstained in their vote at the UN,
That was the first
thus allowing the UN to use the Security Council mandate to quote, protect civilian lives as the sort of cover, the camouflage for what amounted to a NATO aggression against an African country, Libya. The Russians at that point came in and said, no, we're not going to let that happen again. We're going to stand with Syria, one of our important allies. And Zelensky has now said, well, Syria was destroyed based on Russia's intervention. No, it was a proxy war waged by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey in the beginning against the Assad government. And, you know, we know from Wesley Clark, who was the former NATO commander or U.S. commander in NATO during the Yugoslav war, in his speeches after September 11th, he said the United States, the Bush administration had decided right after September 11th that they were going to take out 7 countries, I believe he said. It was Iraq, of course, Iran, Syria, Libya. They were going to change the balance of forces in Lebanon, Somalia. They were going to, this whole resource-rich part of the world, North Africa, the Middle East, or more correctly, West Asia, but what we in the United States call the Middle East. They were going to destroy the independent governments, not the monarchies, not the royal families, but the independent governments that owed their allegiance to or owed their existence to the anti-colonial uprisings after World War II. They were going to destroy those governments. And here you have Zelensky basically functioning as a front man for American propaganda. You know, Walter, I mean, as we're moving to the finish line, I want to get your thoughts. You know, we've been saying here on the show for a long time,
and getting the blame.
The logic of the conflict in Ukraine is towards escalation. That the U.S. government is playing nuclear chicken. That the U.S. believes that over time Russia will weaken. They're also clearly testing whether China will remain, you know, an ally of Russia. I'm sure you saw that Jake Sullivan met for 12 hours in Malta with the
And from Matron's militia, from what you're saying, would you say there's such a thing as a socialist mode of production that tends to be stabilizing because it creates development efficiently and reduces the tensions of inequality? I mean, I think you could make the argument that that's what we've been seeing in China over the last 10, 15 years, especially. Like we've said before, in the whole opening up period in the Chinese economy, it was never totally clear that was going to have these huge benefits to the Chinese population. I think a lot of people thought China was just becoming a client state at that time. But I think over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen that exact result. Because they have been able to create development officially, and it has increased or reduced the tensions of inequality, like you're saying. But I also think they're also running up against the fact that, like, not only are they not farther enough along in that project as they want to go, they've made some huge successes in eliminating extreme poverty and all this major development in infrastructure and stuff. They're also dealing with the threat of imperialism themselves. They have to worry about that also. They have regions in China, of course, that are destabilized for the exact same reason, like in Xinjiang, and the extremism and separatism that was happening there as a direct result of the U.S. war on terror as well, which they had to step in and try and deal with. So I think you could make the case that they've been employing a mode of production that really does those things, but they also have like a lot of challenges being created directly because of Western imperialism, which doesn't allow them to take this mode of production and really use it to its full extent, because they have to deal with all these other problems and consequences.
This is some guy, Rob Russo, some leftist based in Canada. I was turned on to this sick individual, and I found this.
Hello, Majority Report. What is up? How's it going? Welcome in, Raiders. Hello. We love the raid from Majority Report. Thank you, Majority Report. I appreciate it. How's it going? How's it going? I'm Rob Russo. It's nice to see you. It's nice to have you. Hey, please smash the follow button if you can.
Count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Please smash the follow button if you want to. If you don't mind. Thank you, Dummy Dorko, for the gifted sub. Anyway, we're just getting through the end of this breakthrough news video talking about Ukraine and some of the updates about that with Zelensky addressing the UN and, you know, refuting some of the things that Biden has been saying and what we've been seeing in the media about that. Hey, Neuro Riot, hello, welcome back. So it's a pleasure to have you. Let's continue finishing this video, and then, yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. Why don't we? Why don't we do just that?
Chinese foreign minister about at the same time in the last few days. 12 hours is a long meeting. And it was said to be candid and constructive, you know, using the obvious diplomatic language. But the U.S. is playing this dual game. They're attacking Russia and China,
You can count on
but
me.
at the same
You're gonna
time, they're
have good
hoping.
old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Kijiji Genie. Dimash says, with cluster bombs, landmines, and depleted uranium rounds being used in Ukraine, this war will be killing civilians for decades, even if the war ended today. And that's what we're pointing out, the big hypocrisy between Biden saying, like, we all want this war to end. The whole world wants this war to end. It's only Russia that doesn't want it to end. And the fact is, the reality is, when you send a nonstop flow of arms and weapons and cluster munitions and depleted uranium into a war zone, that doesn't end the war. That only extends it. It only escalates it. And it looks like there's even more escalation on the horizon coming up. And that's not what ending a war is, or wanting to end a war. Ending this war, just like any other war, is going to happen by negotiating, by having diplomacy, by having peace talks, which the U.S. have avoided at every step of the way through this process. And all the only option that's been on the table is just sending more and more and more weapons, which only increases the length of the war. It only increases the violence. And then sending these kinds of munitions and weapons as well is just, you know, going to be killing civilians and kids, like you're saying. I mean, it's not the way that a country is going to act if they're actually interested in ending a conflict. It's really silly that anyone takes that seriously.
To separate them, as they did during the, you know, in the 1970s and 1980s, where they could convince one or the other to break the alliance. China won't do that, hasn't done that so far.
We want this war to end,
Xi
but we
Jinping's
also
government, I
won't
think,
negotiate
fully
with the
knows that
gunpoint
if the
that
U.S.
Ukraine said.
succeeds
So in other
in
words, they
isolating
don't
and
want the
weakening
war to
Russia,
end.
it's not going to save China. It will just advance the timetable for the aggression against China. So far that hasn't happened. But you can see what the U.S. is trying to do, the unveiling of this new strategy, which is try to win over Vietnam, win over India, start to win over South Africa. There's overtures in that direction. Some of the other BRICS countries. And at the same time, sort of minimize, at some level, some of the tensions between the United States and China, perhaps to sort of throw China off. It's kind of like the ultimate bullying strategy. Like if you meet a bully on a playground and they come and they start bashing you over and over again, and they look like they might bash the next person, then they turn to the next person and say, well, you're not his friend, right? You know, in other words, hoping that people in the face of this bullying, aggressive tactic will try to kind of find their own individual salvation away from the other victims of the bully. You can see that's in sort of plain language what the U.S. is actually trying to do.
Yeah, that's right. And they're having a much harder time accomplishing that, succeeding with that strategy now, because of the changed balance of forces in the world. That there is, you know, another economic partner, another source of investment, of infrastructure investment, especially essentially that China now exists as a significant force and potentially pole in international politics, and is cohering this broader alliance, even if it's loose or imperfect or uneven, of other formerly colonized countries that want to fundamentally reshape that balance of power. It's a crucially important development for the world, for the peoples of the world, but it does not make the world necessarily more peaceful. In fact, the United States could escalate to greater and greater lengths. They could seek out new wars and conflicts to provoke, to try to do what you're saying, to break apart Russia and China, to break Russia and China off from the other global South countries that share a lot of common foreign policy goals. And the last thing, I just want to respond to the comparison you were making between Syria and the conflict right now, how Zelensky was referring to Syria at the United Nations. You know, intervention in Syria, too, was sold to the public as something that was humanitarian. That essentially, if the United States didn't step in and prevent the government from massacring people, from killing them, choking them, poisoning them with gas, with banned biological and chemical weapons, then
it's getting rid of old munitions so war profiteering can be pumped harder with more manufacturing, all while proxy field testing against another supposed power because they have an excuse. And yeah, that's what happens in a proxy war, right? A proxy conflict, which is amazing how a lot of people, even people that I like and respect, even people that host other progressive news programs that I really enjoy and admire, still can't admit that this is a proxy war. That's what's going on, which I have found consistently a little frustrating. Despite the fact that I really do like and respect these people, to be perfectly clear. But I think there's people that are on the left in the progressive media sphere that have gotten this wrong from moment one, unfortunately. Couldn't be me, though.
It would just be a slaughter. And so the United States has to step in. That obviously was not the case in Syria. If the United States succeeded, then that meant that there would either be chaos like in Libya, or there would be a government and it would be run by essentially Al-Qaeda. And the same thing is true in Ukraine. I mean, we have to learn these lessons because the lies are always the same. The lies are, we're doing this for a noble reason. We're doing this for democracy or to save civilians or because, the principles of an equitable international order call for it. But the one most important thing for people to keep in mind when they assess the actions and decisions of the US government, especially around the world, is that they don't do anything out of selflessness. They don't do anything because they're magnanimous or because they believe in humanitarian principles. They're only doing it for their own power and for the profits.
People have to understand this basic idea. It's not hard to wrap your mind around.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Walter, we need a new system.
NATO
we
and
say
the
that all the
US
time on
doesn't
the
get involved with these
program.
things because they're nice guys.
It won't
They're
happen
good
by
guys.
itself. People have to organize, mobilize,
That's not how
fight
it works.
for it.
That's not how they operate.
We can do it, of course. But the current system is taking the society, all societies, the whole world towards a greater and greater crisis. Climate catastrophe, endless war. Two of those two together pose a real menace. And right now, the Ukraine war is the tip of the spear. Sadly, the American people have been told by the capitalist-owned mainstream media that the only reason the war is happening is because Russia wants to gobble up Ukraine and all of Europe, when in fact, the U.S. and NATO expansion was the catalyst, the detonator for the entire conflict. That's still somewhat hidden, but all the more reason why we have to expose it. And as the war escalates, I think more and more people in the United States will, in fact, feel compelled to turn against it. Walter Smolarek has been our guest. He's the editor of Liberation News. Go to liberationnews.org. Walter, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate the work that they do. Their analysis has been really helpful over the last year and a half of this conflict. I saw as well, I wanted to talk about because Lula finally met with Zelensky, and and it's interesting because we talk about kind of Western leftists or progressives or whatever who rally around Lula and supported Lula and were like very excited about Lula, defeating Bolsonaro in that election. Lula, who's like that government at that time that was led by Dilma Rousseff was undemocratically couped with an okay from the Obama administration, of which Joe Biden was the vice president, obviously. So you have all these like Western or American progressives that like Lula, but are also completely 100% in the camp of like, we must support Ukraine and Putin bad, and we must continue to arm and fund Ukraine, and we must continue to escalate this conflict. And that's been an interesting contradiction for people to see people that are like, yeah, Lula is fantastic. But then when Lula is like neutral on Ukraine, or has talked about NATO expansion, or talked about the role that imperialism played in provoking the conflict, which again is not controversial anywhere except like Canada and the United States and Western Europe and Australia, then all of a sudden they don't know how to take it. They're like, what is he, a tanky? Lula the tanky? And they don't know how to handle it. So yeah, it's interesting. So I saw a couple things, like even when they went through with this meeting finally, where people were like, oh, maybe Lula is coming around. Maybe finally Lula is coming around to this. And it's like, that to me is amazing. Like if you're Canadian or American and you see like Lula who you claim to like and admire, Lula making a point about being neutral on this conflict or talking about NATO expansion, and your thought process isn't, am I wrong about this? Am I wrong? Maybe I've been misled. This person that I claim to like and admire, I know we got the raid from Majority Report a few minutes ago. Michael Brooks of the Majority Report obviously was a big Lula guy, a big Lula supporter, and I think met him actually too, which was really cool. you know. But I don't. That I find that kind of contradiction kind of interesting. People say, "Oh yeah, I love Lula. Lula's fantastic. It's really great that he defeated Bolsonaro," and then at the same time saying like, "But does he support Putin? Why is he wrong about this?" You know, and then he's meeting with Zelensky. Oh, maybe he's coming around. And none of these people ask themselves, maybe it's me that's wrong. Maybe I'm wrong about this. Maybe I should be taking cues from Lula about how I should approach this topic or this subject. Maybe I should listen to what he's saying about NATO expansion and imperialism and the role that played in provoking the conflict. But people don't do that. They're like, no, Lula, this guy who I like and admire, this like longtime fighter for progressive values and social justice, it's him that's wrong. He's wrong. He got this one wrong. And me, Western leftist divided in Canada or the United States, I'm the one that really knows what's going on. I mean, to me, yeah, that to me is like a kind of arrogant and chauvinistic viewpoint. And you can't be like, oh yeah, I think Lula's great and I admire him, but then not listen and not pay attention when Lula talks about what he thinks about this Ukraine and Russia conflict and talks about the role that NATO played in provoking the conflict. Perhaps people that want to claim to appreciate Lula and like him should just pay attention to what he says and maybe ask themselves if maybe they're wrong about it, not him. Yeah, that MB clip from 2014 when he says that NATO expansion is provocative to Russia. When that was when they were entering Crimea. That's right. Michael was very good on these topics, and I don't want to put words into his mouth, but I think he would have been really valuable to have around during this conflict to give clarity and analysis to people that I think might have gone off the rails without him there to kind of hold their hand through it. R.I.P. MB. Have to credit him with kickstarting my political evolution. Great annual remembrance episode over on TMR. Absolutely played a big role for that as me as well. And I mean, when I was really thinking about getting into like podcasting and live streaming around 2017, 2018, he was one of the people I was looking to, and I was like, I want to be I want to be there. I want to be where he's at. I want to be doing what this guy's doing. And played a huge part in inspiring me to get involved in doing this kind of work. And when I started doing my podcast, I sent, after like 3 episodes, I didn't even know him at all, but I sent the 3rd episode to Michael Brooks. And I said, what do you think? What do you think about this, Michael? And he listened and he wrote back to me despite not knowing who I was, and was super enthusiastic and positive about it and encouraging, because that's what he was about. That's what he was about, was bringing people together and encouraging people to, follow through on this stuff and to talk about these issues. I really give him a ton of credit towards me being what I'm doing right now. R.I.P. to Michael. I fucking cried like a baby when Michael died. I was absolutely devastated, which was weird. I didn't even really know why. I mean, for all the reasons that I just outlined, but I didn't know Michael that well. It's not like we were friends or anything. We had been in touch a few times. We had been in touch actually pretty recently at the beginning of the pandemic. He had DM'd me out of the blue. I would have liked to have gotten to know him better. I would have loved to have been able to talk to him on a podcast or a stream. And when he died, I was just devastated. Like, as someone that was like someone in my family had died. And I had a lot of regret as well, because like I really wanted to be able to talk to him on a podcast or a stream or whatever, but I always felt like I'm not ready yet. Like when I'm ready, when I'm really like at where I want to be, I'll talk to Michael. I'll invite Michael on. And I had a lot of when he died, I was like, I felt really horrible that I had kind of let that opportunity go away. R.I.P. to Michael. I got to take a few minutes, folks. So we're 3 hours into the stream. I got to go in 30 minutes. I got to go in 30 minutes to pick up my kid from school. If you enjoy this program and you enjoy the work that I do here on Twitch and you like the analysis and you like the community, please, if you can, subscribe to TRRS. I've not really been pushing this too much today. We've been having a lot of discussion and we wanted to get through this. But the only way that I'm able to keep doing this show right here on twitch.tv/Rob Rousseau, folks, is if people subscribe to the program. Yeah, every little bit helps. It's $5 if you're a new subscriber. If you've never subscribed before, subs are on discount right now. It's also a discount to go from a tier 1 to a tier 2 or tier 3, or to go from 1 month to 3 months or 6 months. Those are all discounted right now. And yeah, folks, the only way that I'm able to keep doing this show is through the generosity of the TRRS community members. So if you can, please subscribe. Please help me make my little number go up. I've been holding off for the September gift week. Yeah, and that's totally fair. That's totally fair. I am going to do like a more of a slub fest. I'll do one more slub fest before the month is through, when the gift subs are on discount as well. But that doesn't. I'm still here though today, and as you know, folks, every day I must make the little number go up. I must make the little number go up. It is my whole purpose in life, is to make the little tiny number at the bottom of the screen, that number, go up. It's the only way I'm able to do this show. So if you can, folks, please subscribe to TRRS. You can gift subs, join the community, join Twitch's only 2-dimensional triangle-shaped friendship access and trickle-down clout tiered reward system. The line must never go down. This is true. This is very true. Try and say that in a small town. I will. I will do that. But do we have any takers, folks? Surely I'm not going to be left hanging in this segment to this extent. I'm positive that any moment some brave person and generous chatter will save me from the embarrassment of having to just continue talking with nothing coming in. Are they actually going to give gift subs?
You can count on me.
Yes.
You're going to have good old
that's
Rob
at the end of the month. I'd have to check the timing,
this.
but that's at the end of the month. Irate Lump, thanks very much for the 33 months tier 1.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I click on the Discord link, still says it's invalid. Really? What? Doesn't make sense. There, well, there's a fresh one. That should work. And thank you, Dr. Maggot, as well, for the gifted sub. You've been very supportive lately, Dr. Maggot, and I really appreciate it a lot. Thank you. Wonder if it expired because we went under 14 boosts. I guess that's possible. I really don't know. I really don't know. Oh, you know what? Actually, I mixed a new version of one of my electronic tracks, the one that I've been playing like lately, like the one that I was doing yesterday. It's always kind of bugged me a little bit. This one. Where is it? This one. It's always kind of bugged me because it gets to this like chorus section and it's never quite lifted the way I wanted to. So last night I did a little tinkering with that. I did a little tinkering with that track. I can put that on a couple minutes. You can see the difference. But folks, does anyone else want to support TRRS? We've had a couple of brave and very generous subscribers and sub-gifters so far. But is there any other brave heroes that want to step forth? Again, I've been going on 3 hours, 7 minutes. I've been yapping, and we've been having some good dialogue and discourse and commentary. But the only way I can do it is with your support, folks. It's the only way that I can keep doing this program is through the extreme generosity of the community. That's you, the viewer, the listener. I'm not even making minimum wage right now. No, I'm in the territory right now when it would have been probably better for me to do something else with my time today, which is never a good place you want to be. Although I have been meeting the goal very regularly. Like this week has been, the level of support has been really fantastic this week and over the last couple of months in general. But that still leaves me here today needing number to go up. You know, I know it can't always be the same level of support, and I can't always hit the targets as much as I would like to. But I'm sure that if we can make it go up a little slightly bit more, a small amount. It's been a while since you had the dance. Yeah, I've not been really dancing or really humiliating myself in any way. That's nice. That's always nice. Now there is 15 boosts, though. Now we have unlocked all the boosting perks. So yeah, I was saying that I could put that on, but I can't really take a break. Can't really take a break.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Squatch, thank you so much. Squatch True. Thank you for the 5 gifted subs and for all the support. Today and every other day. I really appreciate that. Squatch True, thank you. Buy yourself an apple. I still got a couple of apples in the fridge. But I will. Thank you, Squatch. I really appreciate it. Do you have any other takers? Do we hear 20? Do you think we can get to 20? Is that a possibility? Oh my. I think I was dancing to Deacon Blues on that one as well. Dakadoon, thank you so much.
Time.
Thank you very much, Dakadoon, for the $6.90. 6 and 9, huh? Nice. Very nice. Do we have any other takers? Do any other brave chatters want to step forth to support this program? Again, I don't get the fracking billionaire money. I don't get the NGO complex money. I don't get the Roger Waters money either, as much as I would like to. Maybe I should get Roger's email address and maybe I can get him to sponsor the show too. I don't have Russia or China giving me money. I don't have anybody. I just have you, the chat, the chatters, the viewers, the listeners. It's the only way that I'm able to continue doing this program each and every day, which some people seem to like. You know? Some of you seem to like it. And that's the only way I'm able to keep this show on the air. Get it together, Russia and China. Seriously, you'd think they would recognize by now that I'm, offering a pretty important service. and can be bought very easily. You know? By the way, I want to say Irate Lump was at 33 months. Very, very close to the brand new badge. The brand new sub badge. I'm really excited to start seeing that sub badge in the popping up in the chat. I'm just going to put on some kind of audio-visual thing. I'm just going to stick around for another 15 minutes, and then I got to go. I was going to try and make the number go up. I hope people understand.
You can count on me. You're going to have good old Rob to talk you through all this.
Thank you, Kijiji Genie. Thank you, Kijiji Genie, for the gifted sub. Very, very kind of you. Thank you. Let me know what you think of this. Please support TRRS, folks. I was thinking about Terminator as well. I could do that. Okay, you just convinced me. Dr. Maggot, you just convinced me. You just fucking convinced me. Okay, try again. It's too fast. Actually, slow it down. I'm streaming for a bit longer, but only like 15 minutes. Little Rob is doing good, but I gotta go pick him up at school pretty soon, so can't stay too much longer. But I'm trying to make the little number go up. That's what I'm trying to do. See? I gave it a little Blade Runner synth as well. I made the drums sound better too. so scary at this. The no eyebrows look. James Cameron always making the bad guys ride around in cop cars too, because he's cool. That was the new version. I think it's better. I think I like it better. It elevates now. It lifts. It lifts way more. I never liked how much that part lifted enough. So, folks, I'm sorry to be a broken record here, but I gotta go in about 10 minutes. It's been a good 3 hours of discourse and discussion today. Does anyone else want to support this program before I have to leave to go pick up my kid from school? Are there any other wonderful, generous heroes that want to support this program? Again, I'm looking to the east. I'm looking to the east. I'm waiting for Gandalf told me at dawn on the third day, look to the east. I'm waiting for Gandalf. That's the east, I think. This is that. I'm looking for Gandalf and the Rohirrim.
Good old Rob to talk you through all this.
I'm waiting. Yeah, you don't look to the west, exactly. I'm looking to the east for Gandalf and the Rohirrim to come save my ass. Thank you, Diego. You truly are my Gandalf. Thank you, Diego. This scene is so fucking good. Don't touch me. It's funny how new wave his outfit is originally.
You've just become an elite member of the Friendship Triangle.
Oh my goodness, Sunny Sola. coming through absolutely coming through in the clutch. Sunny Sola, thank you so much. 5 gifted subs from Sunny Sola. That's what I'm talking about. I really appreciate that, Sunny Sola. Thank you for that. Yet, I don't, honestly, Dr. Maggot, I'm not totally sure how the leaderboard works because I reset the goals every day, but it doesn't seem like the leaderboard resets. I think it's just like a week by week thing. I'm pretty sure, but I don't know if it's me that resets that or what. The music works with it too, with the when it's in a little bit more slow-mo. Oh shit, he sees her. He's so scary in this. Oh my god. I'm gonna check into that Sunny Sola for the first time in like 3 years. Maybe I should figure out how the leaderboard works heading into season 4 of this program. I mean, the music works, especially when you slow it down so it has that kind of dreamlike quality as well. We got squibs as well, of course. What a shot. Look at that. That's cinema. That is cinema. Oh my goodness. James Cameron, the absolute god. How is this movie not schlock? How is it not dumb B-movie bullshit? How is it such an iconic masterpiece? What an incredible accomplishment. Fucking cool. Well, folks, thank you very much for supporting this program. And if anyone else still wants to subscribe and support the work that I do here on Twitch, you're welcome to do so. I do got to get out of here, though. Bit of a slower day today. Like I said, this week has been fantastic. People have been very, very supportive, and I really, really appreciate it a lot. I appreciate every single person that comes and hangs out in the chat, in this channel, that watches this program or listens to it, that supports any way they can. It means so much. Thank you, everybody that contributes to this. As much as I must make little number go up, don't ever get it twisted. Don't ever think that I don't appreciate with every fiber of my being how lucky I am to be able to do this program, and the fact that there's people out there that have been supportive of that. It means the world to me, really. It really does. Tell your wealthy rock star and tech billionaire friends. Seriously, why am I the only one that's not on this train here? Jesus. Thanks, folks. I'll be back tomorrow. gotta buy the dip on those NFTs. Buy the dip. Now no one expects it. Now is the best time to buy an NFT. Now that it's supposedly collapsed the market. This is how we win. Okay, we can have all the apes to ourselves now. We've bided our time. We've cherry-picked our moment. Now is the time that we can collect all the apes. That's just smart. All the apes can be ours. It's the opposite of all our apes gone. All our apes are going to be there. And saving my slurp juice for just this time. Good. I'm glad. I'm glad that you have. So thanks again, folks. Oh, shit. I mean, that's on YouTube, right? You're allowed to have that.